Chapter 467. I agree. The other two military doctors couldn't help but nod their heads. It was obvious that this was exactly what they wanted to say. Even if the front line was defeated, the three military doctors still had the same attitude. Speaking of which, this was something that could not be helped. Who was Ruan Yongyang? He was a member of the Ruan clan and the nephew of the frontline commander, Ruan Genwang. If he lost his right leg because of this, it was equivalent to the three of them losing their heads. For the sake of their own lives, they would never agree to leave this place right now. The three military doctors had their own ideas, which gave the Chiliarch a headache. He knew that retreating now was the best way. Perhaps they could preserve the strength of 1,000 men, but sacrificing one of Ruan Yongyang's legs would not end well even if they escaped with their men. Since that was the case, it was better to stay and defend with all their strength. If the reinforcements could arrive in time, they might be able to survive. Organize the defense immediately. At the same time, send someone to Guangnan Prefecture to ask for reinforcements. It must be fast. The Chiliarch was a decisive person. After making the decision, he began to arrange the following matters. Then, the 1,000 men began to move to a slightly higher place that they had chosen long ago. Obviously, they wanted to use the terrain to strengthen their defense. The 1,000-man team quickly left the place. Only when everything quieted down did the mound 100 meters away move slightly. Then, Su Yunxing, who was covered in leaves and dust, suddenly stood up from the mound. Phew! First, he exhaled a mouthful of turbid air. Then, he shook his body hard to shake off the dust that stuck to his body for camouflage. Then, he determined the direction and rushed to the camp of the main force. There was a whole platoon of scouts lying in ambush nearby. What they needed to do was to shoot Ruan Yongyang at the critical moment. They did not want to kill him, but only to make it inconvenient for him to move. If this task was given to others, it would naturally be difficult to accomplish. It could even be called an impossible task. As the general of the front line, how could Ruan Yongyang have too few guards around him? However, it was a different matter in the eyes of the mercenaries who had long-range weapons. At least in the eyes of the elite scouts, all they lacked was an opportunity. Once the ambush location was closest to Ruan Yongyang, that person could replace a platoon of soldiers to complete this seemingly impossible mission. Unfortunately, Su Yunxing, who was already a squad leader, had good luck. The place where he was lying in ambush happened to be Ruan Yongyang's temporary resting place. Thus, the shot was fired and completed the 6th young master's orders. Su Yunxing was somewhat excited as he rushed towards the mercenary camp. Of course, he wasn't going there to show off his achievements. Instead, he needed to tell the 6th young master what he had just heard and seen so that he could make the best decision. Outside the Yang family army's camp, the frequency of gunshots was getting lower and lower. From the start of the battle, when the Jiaoji army started charging and stepped on the first landmine, it had been 6 hours since the start of the battle. When the battle started, it was afternoon and they could be seen everywhere. Now that it was night time, the moon hung high in the sky and the sky was getting darker and darker. After 3 hours of intense battle, the overall situation was settled. From time to time, there would be battle reports from the front lines. The strategists in the tent were still doing all sorts of calculations. The approximate number of casualties had been calculated. Of the 19,000 enemies, about 7,000 had died from the mines, 3,000 had died in the first frontal assault, and another 5,000 had been killed by the subsequent attacks. Now, there were less than 4,000 people still running away. However, even these 4,000 people wouldn't have a good ending. There was an 80% chance that they would be caught and killed by the cold vanguard, auxiliary soldiers, and temporary auxiliary soldiers that were scattered out. Only about 10%, or at most 20%, of the enemies were lucky enough to survive. However, whether or not they were able to withstand the harsh weather of the rainforest and resist the invasion of the poisonous insects and live a healthy life, only the heavens would know. Report, Scout Platoon Squad Leader Su Yunxing requests an audience. The voice of the first guard, Ba Daojiang, rang out from outside the tent. Su Yunxing. Hearing this name, Yang Chendong quickly outlined the figure of a tall young man in his mind. He saw the potential of the other party as a scout during the assessment and discovered him. Since he was someone that Yang Chendong thought highly of, how could he not have an impression of him? Let him in. As the voice fell, the tense curtains were pulled open from the outside. Su Yunxing, his face covered in dust and his body wrapped in leaves, strode in. "Hello, sixth young master," Su Yunxing said excitedly with a very standard military salute. "You've worked hard. Come, quickly give Yunxing a bowl of water to drink." Although Su Yunxing's mental state was very good, Yang Chendong could still see that his body was a little tired. Yang Chendong, who started as a scout, was very clear about the hardships in the rainforest. A bottle of canned fruit was poured into a big bowl. Hu Mang personally delivered it to Su Yunxing. Then, Su Yunxing opened his big mouth and revealed an honest smile. Then he gulped down the big bowl of canned fruit. He was indeed a man. Even the fruit in the soup was finished in one gulp without the slightest pause. This scene caused Hu Mang and Yang Er, who were watching from the side, to laugh mischievously. Perhaps he felt that his posture of drinking the canned fruit was a little too strong. Su Yunxing also scratched his head and laughed. Seeing that Su Yunxing was more energetic after drinking a bowl of canned fruit, Yang Chendong asked with a smile, "How is it? Do you have any good news to tell me?" "Yes, sixth young master. My luck is good. The enemy General Ruan Yongyang is only 100 meters away from me. I shot him in the right calf, and the bullet penetrated. Now they have retreated to a high hill 2 miles away and are in a defensive position. They can't escape." Su Yunxing was indeed worthy of being promoted to the position of deputy platoon leader. The military report was very detailed and decisive. Yang Chendong listened to these reports and happily raised his arm, then slammed it down. As long as Ruan Yongyang can't escape, then the next thing will be easy. "Not bad, squad leader Su Yunxing. You have done a great job this time, and after the battle is over, you will be rewarded." Su Yunxing's eyes also flashed with light. First, he straightened his body and agreed, then he smiled as if they were familiar with each other. "Sixth young master, do you want us to sneak up and kill them a few times while it's dark?" With the existence of night vision equipment, plus the fact that they usually train at night, it was not difficult for them to kill in the dark. It was even one of their best skills. However, in the face of Su Yunxing's request, Yang Chendong did not immediately agree. Instead, he shook his head and said, "No need, they are already frightened now. If we scare them too much, it will be easy for them to turn around and run. If that's the case, then it won't be fun. Besides, every scout has a treasure. It's better not to take risks." Hearing that Yang Chendong was so concerned about the safety of his brothers, Su Yunxing's eyes were filled with gratitude. "Thank you, sixth young master, for your concern, but we are not afraid of hardships or dangers. Good, your fighting spirit is commendable, but we really don't need you now. How about this? Go back and inform your platoon leaders and comrades to take turns watching Ruan Yongyang and the others tonight. Take turns to rest well and keep an eye on the movements outside Liang Mountain. Once you discover the Jiaoji army coming, report to me immediately." Yang Chendong was not thinking about how to deal with Ruan Yongyang. Since the other party had already decided to stay behind, it was like a piece of juicy meat in his mouth. He could eat it whenever he wanted. Right now, he was more concerned about how to take down the army of Jiaoji. After all, compared to the appetizer in front of him, that was the real feast. Su Yunxing accepted the order and left. Yang Chendong was still unable to rest in the military tent. He still needed to listen to the reports from all sides to make the most accurate judgment and various arrangements for the upcoming battle. Fortunately, everyone had enough time to rest. Staying up all night like this was not a problem at all. Guangnan Prefecture. On the morning of the third day after the battle, news of the battle at Liang Mountain reached their ears. In the largest residence in the prefecture, where General Ruan Gingwang rested, the sound of porcelain shattering could be heard early in the morning. "Idiot, idiot!" Ruan Gingwang's hysterical shouts were accompanied by his heavy breathing. It was obvious that he had been angered by the battle report. 20,000 against 10,000. Not only were they defeated, but they were also severely injured in a single night. Their strength was reduced to less than a tenth of their original strength. This result was completely out of everyone's expectations. In Ruan Gingwang's view, even if the mercenaries had some tricks up their sleeves, they should not have much room to display in the rainforest. It was already amazing that they could fight his nephew Ruan Yongyang to a stalemate where both sides were injured. At that time, he only needed to send in 10,000 or 20,000 soldiers to achieve victory. Who would have thought that he would be defeated so quickly? Moreover, he would be defeated so easily and thoroughly? General, young General Ruan is in a critical situation. I would like to request for battle. Hong Jin had also seen the battle report. However, they were not sad at all. On the contrary, they were gloating. He should have been the one leading the troops. Now that someone else had taken the lead, it made him feel very uncomfortable. Now that the one who wanted to take the credit had failed, wasn't it time for him to show his skills? Hong Jin took the initiative to request for battle. Ruan Gingwang raised his eyebrows. Alright, I will allow it. However, you must act quickly. Saving Yongyang is a great merit. Then, I will personally lead the army to support you. No matter what, this mercenary army must be eliminated to vent my hatred. Chapter 468. Ruan Gingwang was indeed very angry. His journey out of Jiaoji had been very smooth. Now, an army of more than 10,000 people dared to provoke him and even won the first battle. If he did not teach them a lesson, who knew how many people would laugh at him? This was something he could not tolerate. Yes. Hong Jin replied excitedly. He knew that it was time for him to shine. There were 6 major surnames in Jiaoji. They were Ruan, Chen, Li, Fan, Huang and Pan. Even though there were a few people with the surname Hong, they weren't very famous. As the descendants of the Hong clan, they were instilled with the idea of how to raise their clan's status in Jiaoji and enter the ranks of the 6 great clans. Hong Jin was instilled with this idea since he was young. This was also the motivation for him to work hard. In order to achieve this goal, he came to Ruan Gingwang's side after joining the army. He hoped that he could use the number 1 family to win glory for his family. Under his continuous efforts, the results were not bad. At least, he became a person that Ruan Gingwang trusted and became a general. This time, he finally had the opportunity to lead the army alone. How could he not be excited? Not to mention, Ruan Gingwang gave him a total of 50,000 soldiers because of Ruan Yongyang's experience. Although there were only 10,000 elites in Jiaoji, there were still 40,000 people from the Han captive army. According to Ruan Gingwang, didn't their mercenary army have a lot of landmines? Fine, I'll send 40,000 people to charge. I want to see if you have more landmines or my soldiers. After organizing the 50,000 soldiers, Hong Jin Xiong set off. He wanted to let everyone see and know how outstanding the Hong family was. The 50,000 soldiers left Guangnan City in the afternoon. This was because the army had been mobilizing before the battle. Since the higher-ups had made the decision, all they had to do was pull the people out. Just as the 50,000 soldiers left the city, the people from the security bureau rushed out through the small path. They needed to inform the 6th young master of this news as soon as possible. Liang Mountain. It started to drizzle early in the morning, so much so that the entire mountain looked misty. It was like a paradise on earth. However, Ruan Yongyang had long lost the mood to appreciate such scenery. At this moment, his calves were wrapped in thick, coarse cloth. He was also carried to a wooden chair that had been temporarily made. Just like that, he looked into the distance with a gloomy gaze. The 3 military doctors had already said that his calf had been pierced by a sharp object and the burns were severe. It was impossible for him to recover. The best result was that he could barely walk, but he would have to limp and wouldn't be able to pick up any speed. In short, he could no longer walk around like a normal person, let alone lead a battle in the future. Since when could a cripple lead an army of thousands to charge on the battlefield? The Ruan family was the number 1 family in Jiaoji. There were countless young generals like them. If he couldn't hold on, the family could just replace him with someone else. But to Ruan Yongyang, he would eventually be the one who would be abandoned by his family, even if his uncle was Ruan Gingwang. He would not be able to fight in the future, and he had lost this battle so thoroughly. Yuan Yongyang's heart was like dead ashes. He could not see a trace of light and hope in his life. "General, it's time to drink your medicine." A military doctor carefully walked in front of Yuan Yongyang. Clearly, he also knew that the young general was in a bad mood. Even though he was somewhat prepared, when Yuan Yongyang suddenly knocked over the bowl of medicine, the military doctor was still scared out of his wits. He trembled in fear and retreated. "Scram! Will my body recover if I drink your medicine?" he shouted loudly. At this moment, all the anger in his heart was vented on the military doctor. Of course, medicine could not cure the illness. It could only alleviate the symptoms. Faced with such a question, the military doctor naturally did not dare to speak the truth. He could only stand there with a wronged expression. Fortunately, the Chiliarch took the initiative to walk over and saved him. "General, you should still drink your medicine no matter what. Your body is still the most important." "None of this is important. This general has been defeated and will become a cripple in the future. These are all facts. This is the most important thing." Yuan Yongyang shook his head continuously. His eyes were filled with a deathly aura. This silence lasted for about half the time it took to brew a cup of tea. Then, Yuan Yongyang seemed to have returned to normal. He asked, "What's the situation outside now?" "No, it's not good." The Chiliarch hesitated for a moment, but still decided to report the truth. "We are now surrounded. There are mercenaries outside. They have blocked all our escape routes. It seems like they will launch a fatal attack at any time." "How many people are there?" Yuan Yongyang asked with a cold expression. "I don't know. They are all over the mountains. I can't see how many people there are," the Chiliarch said with a helpless tone. In an instant, the atmosphere became much more oppressive. After another half a day, Yuan Yongyang took a few deep breaths. After a long struggle, he said, "How many people do we have left? When can the reinforcements be sent?" "We still have more than 1,500 people in our hands. Among them, 500 escaped. Because they were scared of being beaten, they affected the soldiers in our hands. Now that the morale of the army is unstable, the situation is very critical. We may collapse at any time. As for the reinforcements, we can't send any messages out now. We don't know what the situation outside is like." The Chiliarch was telling the truth. Ever since they were surrounded, they could not send any messages out. Even news from the outside could not be sent in. The only thing they could do now was to wait. Wait to be rescued or all of them die here. "I don't know." Hearing this answer, Yuan Yongyang wanted to get angry. However, when he thought about how unstable the morale of the army was, he could only suppress the anger in his heart. "Go and tell the brothers that my uncle won't leave us to die. He will definitely come and save us. As long as we can survive these 2 days, we will definitely see hope. When the time comes, we will surround them and the center will bloom. At that time, everyone will be meritorious. Yes, I will speak to the brothers. However, General, you still have to take your medicine. Without a healthy body, we will not be able to see the day of victory." The Chiliarch was persuaded by these words. If they could really hold on until the reinforcements arrived, he would be able to protect Yuan Yongyang from death. This would undoubtedly be a great achievement. Looking at this layer of relationship, not only would he not be at fault, he might even be rewarded. Hearing the Chiliarch's advice and thinking that he still needed this person, Yuan Yongyang obediently took a new bowl of medicine and drank it. A bitter look flashed across his face as he said to the Chiliarch, "Continue to send people to contact the outside. No matter what, we cannot just sit here and wait." "General, don't worry. I will make the arrangements now." The Chiliarch also knew that if the news did not spread, their chances of survival would be greatly reduced. Outside the encirclement, a battalion of Lung Feng soldiers and 2 battalions of auxiliary soldiers were scattered in all directions. Compared to the anxious Jiaoji soldiers in the encirclement, they were not anxious at all. On the contrary, those who were supposed to be dozing off were dozing off. Less than a third of them were left to monitor every movement within the encirclement. With such a force, even if they charged into the encirclement now, They were 100% confident that they could kill Ruan Yongyang. They could even guarantee their own safety. However, since there were orders from above that they were not allowed to charge now, all they could do was wait. Fortunately, from time to time, they would see Jiaoji soldiers trying to rush out to report the news. They could be used as live targets to practice their spears, so it was not too boring. Of course, things like practicing their spear skills were mostly done by the auxiliary soldiers. Only Jiaoji soldiers who truly wanted to charge out of their shooting range would attract the attention of the Lung Feng soldiers. The reason why they were called the most elite Lung Feng soldiers was because they were much stronger than the auxiliary soldiers in terms of spear skills. What were the auxiliary soldiers? They were the reserve soldiers of the Lung Feng soldiers. As long as they performed well enough, they could also join the Lung Feng soldiers. In order to achieve this goal, even though the orders from above were for the auxiliary soldiers to take turns to rest, most of them gave up on this authority. They hid in hidden places and carefully observed every movement in front of them, waiting for their target to appear. Bang! This was already the third gunshot in an hour. As the gunshots rang out, complaints could be heard from the surrounding area. Who is this? So fast. I just saw a figure and he King opened fire. Do you have to be so anxious? Of course, those who said such things were the kind of people who were envious and jealous. However, although they said such things, everyone's expression became more serious. They only hoped that they would be the next one to hit the target. The higher-ups had said that the person with the best performance this time would be promoted to Lung Feng. The prerequisite was that this person's cultural studies would meet the standards. Of course, the cultural studies would meet the standards. Those who could become auxiliary soldiers would seize the time to learn when they had the time. In order to pave the way for themselves to become Lung Feng soldiers, most of the auxiliary soldiers were already at the 3rd grade of primary school and above. What they lacked now was an opportunity to become Lung Feng soldiers. Now that the opportunity was in front of them, who wouldn't want to grab it? Under such a tense competition, it would be a miracle if the surrounded Jiaoji soldiers wanted to run out to report the news. In such a competitive atmosphere, the surrounded Jiaoji soldiers' morale became weaker and weaker. If it wasn't for the fact that there were soldiers who wanted to surrender and ran outside while shouting to surrender but were still shot dead, these 1,000 people would have already surrendered by now. Chapter 469. They did not charge, nor did they kill you, nor did they accept your surrender. Under such an atmosphere, the 1,000 Jiaoji soldiers were simply waiting for death. Without any spirit, they were all on the verge of mental collapse. Outside of Liang Mountain, the 50,000 soldiers were rushing over in a grandiose manner. Hong Jin was finally able to lead an army by himself, and it was a full 50,000 men. One could imagine how excited he was at this moment, so much so that he had forgotten his previous calm demeanor. There was only one thought in his mind, and that was to enter Liang Mountain as quickly as possible. Putting aside whether or not he could destroy the mercenaries, he had to save Ruan Yongyang first. Even though the intelligence report said that Ruan Yongyang was injured and his right leg could not move, he was still a Ruan Yongyang. But no matter what, he was still a member of the Ruan family, and he was also General Ruan Gengwang's nephew. If he could save his life, he would receive a lot of gratitude from the Ruan family. Thinking about how the Hong clan could rise up in Jiaoji with the support of the Ruan clan, Hong Jin was extremely excited. Under such excitement and impatience, the 50,000 soldiers moved much faster than before. Even their formation had become somewhat disorderly. Some of the Han captives had blisters on their feet, and their stomachs were empty. However, Hong Jin did not care about any of this. He was only thinking about one thing, and that was to charge into Liang Mountain, save Ruan Yongyang, and destroy the mercenaries. Once he could accomplish these goals, what did it matter if the soldiers suffered a little? A general's success was built on 10,000 corpses. Which general did not rely on killing and sacrificing tens of thousands of people to become famous? Being stimulated by such a thought, it should take Hong Jin 2 days or almost 3 days to arrive at the periphery of Liangshan Mountain from Guangnan Prefecture. However, he did it in less than 2 days. On the afternoon of the 3rd day after leaving Guangnan Prefecture, the army headed straight for the depths of Liang Mountain. Outside of Mount Liang, there were already Jiaoji army scouts waiting there. The reason why they could still stand there was not because the scouts did not have the ability to eliminate them, but because they wanted to keep them alive. If they wanted to enter the mountains, they needed someone to lead the way. After meeting up with the scouts left outside and finding out the location of Ruan Yongyang's army, Hong Jin didn't even let the army rest before charging in. Logically speaking, this method was not beneficial to the war, but Hong Jin was too eager to contribute. In his opinion, if he entered the mountain later, he would lose a chance to save Ruan Yongyang. This was something that he could not give up. As for whether the army was too tired, as long as General Ruan was saved, everyone could have a good rest. After all, they had 50,000 soldiers, which was 4 times more than the mercenaries. Even so, what was there to be afraid of? Under Hong Jin's lead, the army entered the rainforest. However, as soon as they entered, the marching speed of the army began to slow down. It was not that they did not want to go faster, but the road was too muddy. They could not go faster even if they wanted to. The temperature in the rainforest was humid and hot. In addition, there were all kinds of poisonous insects roaming around. Logically speaking, the army should be resting and reorganizing. At the very least, they should be in formation. However, Hong Jin, who wanted to contribute, had thrown all of this to the back of his mind. Under his strict orders, the 50,000 soldiers were split into dozens of groups, and their original formation was completely messed up. This was especially true for the 40,000 Han captives. Those who were in good conditions wore cloth shoes while those who were in poor conditions wore straw shoes. However, no matter what kind of shoes they wore, once they stepped into the muddy ground, their shoes would become useless. Thus, they could only walk barefoot. Furthermore, the dense forest was filled with gravel. If they were not careful, they would be scratched by the gravel. This greatly hindered their speed. In just 4 to 6 hours, when the sky darkened, the Han captives were already 6 to 7 kilometers away from the Jiaoji army. Under such a distance, they naturally became Yang Chendong's main targets. Last time, when they were attacked, Yang Chendong made up his mind and did not have any intention of taking any captives. However, that was because the situation forced him to do so. After all, the Han captives were mixed together with the Jiaoji army, and it was not easy to differentiate between them. Furthermore, there were landmines everywhere. If he was not careful, he might even hurt himself. As such, he could only retract his thoughts of taking in more captives. However, it was different this time. Now that the Han captives were completely separated from the Jiaoji army, his worries were lessened. Furthermore, the 40,000 Han captives were also a big appetizer. It was worth Yang Chendong's effort. In Yang Chendong's plan, the task of surrounding the Han captives was given to the auxiliary regiment commander Lu Zhua. Lu Zhua could not only lead 8 battalions of auxiliary soldiers armed with Type 81 rifles, but also 14 battalions of temporary auxiliary soldiers. A total of 9,000 soldiers were more than enough to deal with the 40,000 Han captives who were already exhausted and without any morale. Pass down the order. Once the Jiaoji army and Ruan Yongyang merge together, we will immediately cut them off. After that, we will surround all of the Han captives. Try not to let anyone escape. Lu Zhua, Political Commissar Song Zhe, and a few auxiliary battalion commanders discussed for a while before immediately giving out the order. Following which, the 9,000 mercenaries started to move. They quickly moved towards the gathering point according to the plan. Hong Jin did not care too much about all of this. Even though he could feel that there were enemies around him, he still had a lot of soldiers. However, when he thought about how he had 50,000 men and the enemy only had 10,000, his worries disappeared. In comparison, he did not think that the mercenaries could do anything to him. With such arrogant thoughts, Hong Jin rushed all the way and finally found the location of Ruan Yongyang's camp. The auxiliary soldiers of the Cold Vanguard Army purposely opened up a path, allowing the enemy forces to successfully converge. Hong Jin had come, and he had brought 10,000 Jiaoji soldiers with him. After hearing that there were 40,000 Han captives behind him, the 1,000 Jiaoji soldiers who had lost their will to live became excited. Even the half-crippled Ruan Yongyang revealed a smile for the first time in a few days. His right leg was about to be crippled, but at least he was still alive. As long as he could live, who would want to die? Not to mention, after the two armies met up, there was still a chance for him to win the battle. If that was the case, if he handled it well, he might not be the defeated general anymore. He might even become the king of Yu in the eyes of others. General Hong, you've worked hard. When he saw the travel-worn Hong Jin and the 10,000 soldiers behind him, Ruan Yongyang, who was being carried, immediately smiled. General Ruan, you've worked hard. Your leg. Hong Jin was shocked when he saw that Ruan Yongyang had lost at least 6 to 7 kilograms in just a few days. It's fine. How can anyone not get injured on the battlefield? However, since General Hong is here, you must avenge me. You must kill all of these mercenaries and show the might of the Jiaoji army. Ruan Yongyang did not like others to talk about his injured leg. Therefore, he changed the topic to the battlefield. Yes, since I'm here, of course, I must destroy the mercenaries. Hong Jin said confidently. However, as soon as he finished speaking, the sound of firecrackers rang out from the outside. Then, one of his Kiliarchs ran over in a panic. He half knelt in front of Hong Jin and said nervously, "General, something bad has happened. The mercenaries suddenly attacked our camp and killed hundreds of our men." So fast. Hong Jin was furious when he heard that the mercenaries did not wait for his army to settle down before attacking. However, he suddenly thought of something and asked, "Oh right, what about the Han captives behind us? Have they not caught up with us?" "No, we were originally 6 to 7 kilometers away from them. Now that we heard the gunshots, I'm afraid they won't dare to approach us." The Kiliarchs answered honestly. "What? They're that far away?" Clearly, Hong Jin only wanted to save Ruan Yongyang. He did not care much about the 40,000 Han captives behind him. This was also why he could only become a deputy general and rarely led an army. The overall situation was still a problem. As soon as he said this, Hong Jin knew that this was the truth. His Chiliarch wouldn't dare to joke about something like this. After hesitating for a moment, he ordered, "Immediately send someone to contact the Han captives. Tell them to come closer to us. At the same time, we have to do our best to get close to them. First, we have to deal with the mercenaries between us." Hong Jin had never thought that he would lose against 10,000 mercenaries with 50,000 men. At most, he would have to pay a heavy price. It was precisely because of Hong Jin's arrogance and contempt that he lost the initiative in the war from the very beginning. He was completely led by the nose by others. He also did not know that at this moment, he would never be able to meet up with the 40,000 Han captives. Speaking of which, the Han captives really wanted to meet up with the Jiaoji army. In this chaotic world, how important was it to have a strong backer? Even though they couldn't compare to the Jiaoji army in terms of treatment and other aspects, they could still eat their fill if they followed them. They also didn't have to worry about their lives when the sun rose the next day. Just this alone was enough to make some of the weaker ones want to follow them. However, it was not a matter of whether they wanted to follow them or not. Instead, the Han captives could not charge through the forest that did not seem too dense, but it was deep and unfathomable. Everything had changed in an instant. Although they were a bit slow, the Han captives were closing the distance between them and the Jiaoji army. All of a sudden, the sound of firecrackers rang out from the front. Then, everything became a little chaotic. Chapter 470. Before the middle and rear of the army could figure out what was going on, the front had already sent back news that the road ahead had been blocked. Just a moment ago, at least 300 people had fallen to the ground without any warning, accompanied by the sound of gunfire. They were not unfamiliar with firearms, especially since Zhang Fu had led the Great Ming Firearms Squad to defeat the original Jiaoji army a few decades ago, changing this place into Jiaoji Prefecture. When they came, they had heard from their superiors that the enemy mercenaries also had firearms. It was one thing to know about it, but it was another thing to actually face it. Especially when they heard that the gunshots were so dense and that more than 300 of their brothers had died, it was normal for the front line to panic for a moment. The main general, Hong Jin, had already left them. At this moment, only 4 captains of the Han captives remained. Compared to ordinary soldiers, They were taller and more muscular. It was precisely because of this that they were able to be promoted. Their names were Zhang Qingli, the two middle captains, Zhou Hong and Ma Yinghui, and the rear captains, Lu Hong. Other than Lu Hong, who was at the back, who did not immediately follow up, the other three captains gathered together nervously and began to discuss a plan. Ma Hui was the first to speak. The situation is obvious. This is clearly the mercenaries trying to cut off our communication with General Hong and the others, and then they want to take us down one by one. Ma Hui's words had some insight, at least his analysis was correct. However, he did not expect that the mercenaries not only wanted to cut off their communication, but also wanted to kill or capture them. Another captain of the Middle Army, Zhou Hong, quickly expressed his opinion. That's not possible. Didn't the news say that they only have 10,000 people? They want to make an enemy out of 50,000 people with this little number of soldiers? Aren't they a little too arrogant? Zhou Hong was a little chubby, but he had a pair of small eyes. Humans were just like him, they liked to use their brains. It was no wonder that he would have such an analysis. I don't know if they are arrogant or not. Anyway, their muskets are very powerful. You don't know. At the beginning it was like rain. A chilly arch under my command wanted to prepare people to charge, but he was shot dead after shouting a few words. The one who spoke was Zhang Qingli, a major of the vanguard. His body was still trembling as he spoke. He had seen everything clearly, which was why he was so nervous and afraid. When Zhou Hong heard Zhang Qingli's words, his eyes lit up. Brother Zhang, did you just say that the enemy's muskets rained down like rain? Yes, these are my true feelings, he said as if he was swearing an oath. Well, if this is true, then there should be a lot of mercenaries in front of us. They should have gathered their strength together to give off such a feeling. If that's the case, why don't we break through from another direction? The rainforest is so big. Even if they can guard it for a while, they won't be able to guard all the roads. Ma Yinghui immediately agreed, but he added, Brothers, we're all too tired from rushing all the way here. Why don't we let everyone rest for a while and wait until dawn to attack again? This way, we'll be able to unleash our full strength. Yes, but we can't be too late. After all, if we don't appear in front of General Hong Jin, who knows what he will think and whether he will blame us? Zhou Hong nodded and agreed with this statement. If the army was too tired, they wouldn't be able to display their full strength. Under such circumstances, they would be at a disadvantage on the battlefield. Seeing that the two major commanders had reached a consensus, Zhang Qingli immediately said, Since that's the case, I will tell our brothers to stop charging and take the time to rest. Also, send someone to inform Major Lu Hong to bring up the rear. With everyone gathered together, our strength will be greater. I agree. Zhou Hong and Ma Yinghui both nodded their heads and reached a consensus. They decided to take a good rest first and wait until dawn to launch their counterattack. The Han captives became obedient. This made the auxiliary soldiers and temporary auxiliary soldiers around them become dispirited. They wanted to perform meritorious deeds. This was especially true for some of the temporary auxiliary soldiers. After witnessing the power of the Type 81 assault rifle, especially the Type 95, their hearts were filled with the desire to perform meritorious deeds. Once they entered the auxiliary soldiers, or even better, the cold front, wouldn't they also have a firearm that could easily take someone's life from a few hundred meters away? When they thought about how they could kill an enemy with just a flick of their finger, they felt extremely excited. Alright, you guys have a lot to fight. This time, we are targeting the entire Jiaoji. As for now, those who are sleeping, those who are on duty are on duty. The higher-ups have said that there will be a fierce battle tomorrow morning. Just when everyone was thinking about how to perform meritorious deeds, a new order was passed down. In the darkness of the night, it was passed down one by one to the 9,000 auxiliary and temporary soldiers. The auxiliary and temporary soldiers seemed to have reached some sort of agreement with the Han captives and became quiet. However, in front of them, 3 battalions of the Cold Vanguard and 4 battalions of auxiliary soldiers were pressing forward, closing in on the Jiaoji soldiers that they had surrounded. At this moment, the sky was completely dark. Even though there was moonlight and it wasn't to the extent where one couldn't see one's fingers, The visibility wasn't high either. In this kind of weather, other than siege battles that could be carried out with the help of torches, other battles couldn't be fought. This had become a tacit agreement that had been established for thousands of years. After all, the sky was so dark that anything could happen. If things went wrong, it would be normal for their own people to fight each other. Only an idiot would choose to launch an attack at night. However, this didn't include the Yang family army. Putting aside the fact that the auxiliary soldiers of the Cold Vanguard often had night battles as part of their training, did they treat their forest training as a game? The main purpose of their training was to learn how to engage in night battles in the rainforest to protect themselves and eliminate their opponents. Now, it was finally time to put it to good use. Every soldier carried 2 basic rounds of ammunition. Coupled with the night vision goggles on their heads, the night was no longer dark. Everything was presented in front of them. From the moment they launched their attack, they had been suppressing the Jiaoji soldiers and were still advancing. Gunshots rang out from all directions and it was drizzling. In such an oppressive atmosphere, there were Jiaoji soldiers dying at every moment. Urgent battle reports were sent to Hong Jin and Ruan Yenyang. From the start of the battle until now, 4 hours had passed. It was already the middle of the night and the Jiaoji army that originally had over 10,000 soldiers had paid the price of 5,000 deaths. In just 4 hours, half of the army had perished. Moreover, in the early stages of the battle, the formation of the Jiaoji army was too scattered. The battle report showed that as the battle progressed and the Jiaoji army became more concentrated, the death toll increased even faster. Under the temporary wooden tent, General Hong Jin no longer had the calm and natural demeanor of a commander. Instead, his face was dark and his body was trembling in anger. He originally thought that saving Ruan Yenyang and eliminating the mercenaries would be a great achievement. However, he didn't expect that as soon as he arrived and saw Ruan Yenyang, before he could even say a few words, the pressure would suddenly appear. He, who was supposed to save someone, became someone who was supposed to be saved. Compared to Hong Jin, who didn't say a word, Ruan Yenyang, who was sitting on a chair, looked even more dispirited. He leaned against the back of the chair and looked up at the sky. If not for his mouth moving from time to time, others would have thought that he was already a dead man. Lost, completely lost. I'm going to die, I'm going to die. These were the words that Ruan Yenyang had been muttering. However, at this moment, no one paid attention to his actions. This was because another Chiliarch had rushed into the temporary wooden tent with an anxious expression. He then shouted with an anxious tone, "Not good, news just came from the front. The nearest mercenary group is less than a kilometer away from us." So close? When Hong Jin heard this, he turned around in disbelief. He rushed to the map under the coal lamp and looked at it. "Is there any news from the Han captives?" Hong Jin asked the 1,000-man commander who reported the news. "Is there any news from the Han captives?" The 1,000-man commander nodded. "No, I sent people to contact them. However, they were always shot to death not long after they rushed out of the camp. I also found soldiers with good hearing. They told me that there were no gunshots coming from behind us. General Hong, is it possible that they have already surrendered to the mercenaries?" The Chiliarch asked nervously and carefully. Although he knew that it wasn't possible, why was there no movement from the other side when he was fighting so fiercely? Of course, he didn't know that gunshots usually traveled as far as 3 kilometers away. If the terrain, vegetation, season, specific time, air temperature and humidity, as well as nearby noise decibels and wind direction were taken into account, the gunshots would only be heard as far as 1 kilometer away. Unless one was very familiar with gunshots, one wouldn't pay too much attention to it even if one occasionally heard such a sound. The Chiliarch raised his doubts. Hong Jin simply waved his hand and said, "That's impossible. The Han captives have never come into contact with the mercenaries before. How could they surrender here?" Chapter 471. Hong Jin spoke with certainty, but only he knew that he did not have much confidence in his heart. After all, ever since the Han captives were established, they had been treated unfairly. Perhaps they would really surrender. However, in front of his subordinates, he could only continue to encourage them. Like this, Pass down the order that we must hold on. As long as we can hold on until dawn, the 40,000 Han captives will definitely gather around us. At that time, we will be safe. Also, tell the soldiers that the bullets of the guns are limited. No matter how strong the mercenaries are, they cannot continue to shoot without limit. As long as they do not have guns, they can only choose to fight in close combat. That way our chance will come. Yes, I will immediately pass on the general's words to the brothers. The Kiliarka's eyes lit up upon hearing this. He had already lost all confidence, but after hearing Hong Jin's words, he felt a lot better. He even had an idea of his own. General, do you think we should launch a counterattack when we discover that the enemy's muskets are firing slowly? That way, we might be able to snatch some muskets back. Hearing the captain's suggestion, Hong Jin's eyes lit up. Very good. Go and tell the soldiers that when there is such an opportunity, they must take the initiative to attack. If anyone can snatch a gun back, they will be promoted by 1 rank and rewarded with 50 taels of silver. Seeing that his suggestion was accepted, the captain was very happy. He quickly nodded and went to pass on the order. However, he did not know that the scene he was waiting for would not come true. The guns that were developed in the Ming dynasty were flintlocks. They were the type that could only fire 1 shot after being loaded. Once it was fired a few times, the barrel, body, and especially the rifling would be easily damaged. It would need to rest for a while before firing again. However, the Type 95 guns used by the mercenaries did not have such concerns. Most of these guns were taken out by Yang Chendong from the warehouse. They were modern products. On average, each gun could fire 30,000 bullets without any problem. Even the Type 81 assault rifles made by Crimson City were made after the steel technology was matured. The quality was naturally not as good as the Type 81 assault rifles in the warehouse. However, it could fire 5,000 bullets without any problem. This was especially true for the type that was created later. Not to mention the accuracy, after testing, it was already guaranteed that it could hit 8,000 to 10,000 rounds. And this would continue to improve. After all, with the advanced books and samples from the warehouse, as long as he worked hard, he would be able to catch up. Based on this, it was impossible for the Chiliarch to wait for the mercenaries to run out of bullets or have problems with their guns before retaliating. But then again, it wasn't as if they didn't have a chance at all. For example, after a series of strong attacks that wiped out a large portion of the enemy's forces would gather together and they would be able to use the terrain to reflect arrows. Cold Vanguard and the auxiliary troops' attack speed would also slow down. Slowing down didn't mean that he wasn't attacking. Yang Chendong had already given the order that they had to take down the 10,000 Jiaoji soldiers by the night. This was related to whether they could successfully take over the 40,000 Han captives. Thus, the reason why they slowed down their attack speed was so that they could launch a better attack next time. Just like now, the dense gunfire suddenly stopped. This was because Cold Vanguard and the auxiliary troops were moving forward under the cover of the night. This was to ensure that they could get closer to the enemy. Then, the power of the grenades would be revealed. At that time, the enemy would be unable to make use of the terrain and would be razed to the ground. However, before this ferocious attack started, the Jiaoji soldiers had the misconception that the mercenaries' guns had run out of bullets or that there was a problem with the guns. Just like the Kiliarka's order, the Jiaoji soldiers thought that their opportunity had arrived. From the moment they were attacked in the dark, they had been passively attacked. They couldn't even see the enemy's shadow clearly. This made the prideful Jiaoji soldiers very vexed. Now that there was an opportunity to retaliate, everyone wanted to grab hold of it. Thus, the Jiaoji soldiers started to gather together. There were around 400 people on one side and 200 to 300 people on the other side. They were prepared to charge out and snatch the guns. This would allow them to be promoted by 1 rank and receive 50 taels of silver. With the material reward, everyone's actions were indeed much faster. When they were about to gather, the full force of the retaliation began. More than a dozen teams suddenly charged out from all directions. The smallest team had around 100 people while the largest team had around 400 people. This kind of planned large-scale counterattack not only highlighted the element of surprise, But more importantly, the soldiers were also spread out. They thought that even if they encountered a counterattack from the muskets, there would still be some fish that escaped the net. Once the fish rushed to the front of the mercenaries, the advantage would come to them. The sudden counterattack had indeed caught the mercenaries off guard. However, it was only in their eyes that they were surprised. This was because at this moment, the young family soldiers were also preparing to launch a frontal assault with grenades. They were just worried that they couldn't locate the enemy's main force. Now, they had taken the initiative to jump out. This was like someone giving them a pillow when they wanted to sleep. How could they not grab hold of such an opportunity? Otherwise, it would be a waste of their reputation as the elite Cold Vanguard soldiers. Therefore, after a short pause, the excited Cold Vanguard soldiers started to retaliate. No one knew which company or platoon it started from. The powerful grenades in their hands were thrown out as if they were free. Boom, 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 boom. When the flames lit up, there was also the scene of all kinds of things flying into the sky as well as all kinds of screams and howls. After the first attack, the other troops quickly retaliated. The grenades in their hands were immediately pulled out of their bracelets and thrown towards the Jiaoji army. The originally quiet night became lively again, even more fiery than before. Of course, with their cooperation, countless Jiaoji soldiers were blasted away, killed, or torn apart. Under the loud boom, the forest shook. Countless animals in the forest scattered in all directions. They felt as if the end of the world had arrived. All that was left was to flee in panic. In comparison, the days in the temporary Jiaoji wooden tent were also very difficult. When they heard the first explosion, Hong Jin and Ruan Yongyang's faces fell. After the continuous explosions, Ruan Yongyang was already slumped on a chair. Hong Jin was not much better. His entire body was swaying, and his pupils could no longer focus. They originally thought that this would be a chance for them to retaliate. At the very least, they would be able to take back a large portion of the territory that they had lost, giving them more space to maneuver. This way, it would not be difficult for them to hold on until the next day and wait for the Han captives to arrive. Who would have thought that it would cause such a huge commotion? What kind of opponent were they facing? There were landmines before, and what the hell was this? However, regardless of whether the two of them had thought it through, the situation at the front was already unsalvageable. If they continued to defend, although they would still fail in the end, they could at least hold on for a little longer. However, now that they had taken the initiative to attack, it was like sending sheep to the tiger's den. There was no way for them to survive. In less than an hour, the 5,000 men that were sent out were completely annihilated. Those who were lucky did not die immediately, but were left with half a breath of life. When the Cold Vanguard Battalion charged forward, they did not even have the qualifications to waste a single bullet. They were all killed by the bayonets of the Cold Vanguard Battalion. In the end, the 5,000 men were sent out, and there were only 100 men left in the camp. Facing the attacks of 3 Cold Vanguard battalions, 1 regiment's Cold Vanguard company, and 4 battalions auxiliary soldiers, these 100 men did not even last half an hour before they were all killed. When the Vanguard Battalion commander Wu Sheng rushed into the wooden tent with a few of his trusted subordinates, only Hong Jin and Ruan Yongyang were left. The moment Wu Sheng rushed in, his tall figure appeared under the coal lamp, and a long blade slashed towards him. "Scram!" Wu Sheng shouted angrily. He blocked and pulled out his bayonet, causing the long saber to slash to the side. Then, with a stab, the sound of a saber entering the abdomen was heard. Blood flowed out from the abdomen. The one who slashed was Ruan Yongyang. Knowing that he was going to die, he launched a final counterattack with the thought that killing 1 was enough, and killing 2 was worth it. However, his right leg was not very nimble, and he could only slash with all his strength. His body did not move, and the momentum of the blade did not change. Secondly, his opponent was Battalion Commander Wu Sheng. This person had stayed in the Yang Chendong manor for a long time, and was specially trained by Yang Chendong in the art of stabbing. It was only a slash, and it was not enough to hurt him. Ruan Yongyang stared blankly as the bayonet pierced his lower abdomen. Following Wu Sheng's habitual movements of twisting, stabbing, and then pulling out the bayonet, Ruan Yongyang's eyes rolled back as he fell from the chair with a plop. His body violently gasped for breath twice before he was completely dead, no longer able to move. Ruan Yongyang died just like that, dying in front of Hong Jin. This huge shock caused him to kneel on the ground with a thud. "Please don't kill me, I am willing to surrender. I know a lot about Jiaoji, and I will definitely be useful to you, definitely." Hong Jin's greatest dream was to lead the entire Hong family, and in order to achieve this goal, he was willing to do anything. However, the more scheming a person was, the more they feared death. Chapter 472. Scheming people like to think. They weren't like straightforward people who didn't care too much about death. Furthermore, there was no chance of a comeback. Surrendering was the best way out. With Hong Jin's intelligence, how could he not see this? Hence, his kneeling wasn't that sudden. Cowards weren't welcomed on the battlefield. Furthermore, the sixth young master had given the order to wipe out the entire Jiaoji army. Hence, even if Hong Jin knelt, the cold front soldiers who rushed into the tent didn't have any intention of letting him go. One of them even raised his bayonet and wanted to stab him. Lung Feng's movement frightened Hong Jin quite a bit. Although he was kneeling on the ground, it did not stop his body from rapidly retreating. Even so, the gleaming bayonet under the light of the coal lamp was getting closer and closer to him. "Stop!" Fortunately, the moment the bayonet was about to reach him, Wu Sheng suddenly spoke. With Wu Sheng's shout, Lung Feng, who was about to charge forward with his bayonet, stopped moving. This was a good habit that had been cultivated under iron discipline. After shouting, Wu Sheng took a few large steps forward. After leaping over the cold front soldier, he stared coldly at Hong Jin and said, "I hope you're useful. If you don't prove yourself useful, you'll end up like him." Wu Sheng's cold voice rang out as he pointed at Ruan Yongyang, who had already been stabbed to death and was still bleeding profusely from his body. After escaping from the brink of death, Hong Jin was already scared out of his wits. He didn't dare to have any other thoughts. He immediately nodded and said, "Sir, please don't worry. Please don't worry. I'll definitely cooperate with you." "Alright, then let me ask you. Who is he? Or you? Also, what's the current situation of the Jiaoji army? Are there any fish that escaped the net?" Wu Sheng continued to interrogate. The sky was too dark. No one could be sure if the entire Jiaoji army was here or if their higher-ups were hiding. The reason why Wu Sheng didn't consider escaping was because he was confident. There were scouts on the periphery of the battlefield. They were the best of the best in cold front. Trying to escape from under their noses was simply wishful thinking. "Sir, the one who died is called Ruan Yongyang. He is General Ruan Gengwang's nephew. My name is Hong Jin. I am Ruan Gengwang's deputy general. This time, I am in charge of leading 50,000 soldiers to fight against you. Right now, I don't know what's going on with the Han captives, but the 10,000 Jiaoji soldiers that came later should all be dead. Even if some of them were lucky enough to survive, they should be heavily injured." In order to survive, Hong Jin really said whatever he wanted to say. However, he didn't use an affirmative tone for things he didn't know. This was where he was smart. If he knew, he knew. If he didn't know, he didn't know. When Wu Sheng heard this, his eyes immediately lit up. He originally thought that the upper echelons of the Jiaoji army would be in hiding, and it would take some effort to find them. Unexpectedly, all of them were here. How could he not be happy about this? He didn't think about it. It had only been 6 hours since the cold front attacked. The sky wasn't even bright yet. Where could they have escaped to in such a short time? "Men, take him away. Also, send someone to search the area. Find a few injured Jiaoji soldiers and ask them about this person's identity." Even though Wu Sheng already believed half of it, he still needed to verify it. It would be too embarrassing if he was cheated. Hong Jin was tied up. His being tied up meant the end of the Jiaoji army. When this news was quickly reported to Yang Chendong's tent behind him, he still heaved a sigh of relief even though he had expected it. He had planned a lot for this battle in order to achieve a one-hit kill. Even though he had the advantage in many aspects, if the first battle wasn't fought well, it would affect the morale of the army. From the looks of it now, the situation was stable. Inform them that this Hong Jin can be used. Let him repent for his crimes first. Let him persuade the remaining 40,000 Han captives. Yang Chendong happily made the decision. With the idea of making use of trash, he handed the matter of recruiting the Han captives to Hong Jin. If Hong Jin did this well, it would be best. On the other hand, even if there were any mishaps, they wouldn't lose anything. Therefore, when the sun had just risen, when the four captains were discussing and preparing to launch an attack, Hong Jin had already appeared 300 meters in front of them. The four captains were very happy that Hong Jin would appear in front of them. However, when they walked out of the tent, they heard Hong Jin urging them to put down their weapons and surrender to the mercenaries. Generals, the Jiaoji army was finished last night. Ruan Yongyang was killed and I became their captive. Today, I am here to ask you to surrender. After explaining the situation, Hong Jin lowered his head and said in a dejected voice, "The mercenaries are too strong. They have guns that we have never seen before. If we continue to resist, we will die. If I'm smart, I will surrender like you." They also said that since you are all Han, they will not make things difficult for you. Hong Jin was actually here to persuade them to surrender. This was naturally out of everyone's expectations. The four captains were unprepared and looked at each other, not knowing what to do. The other party did not respond. This made the officers of the 2nd Regiment, who were lying in ambush behind Hong Jin, anxious. One of them asked, "Can this Hong Jin do it? If he can't, we need to prepare for a counterattack." "He can, as long as he doesn't want to die." The commander of the 2nd Regiment, Luo Pe, was confident. "Not bad. This Hong Jin is quite eloquent." The political commissar of the 2nd Regiment, Kong Jie, said with a smile. He had chatted with Hong Jin for a while and found that other than the fear on his face, Hong Jin was very rational. Such a smart person would definitely know that if he couldn't complete this mission, he would die. In order to survive, he had to make this happen. The officers of the 2nd Regiment were still looking in their direction. Hong Jin, who was standing there, was already anxious. When he arrived, he saw with his own eyes a cold vanguard soldier easily knock down a bird from 700 meters away. That scene shocked him so much that his eyes widened. Right now, less than 600 meters behind him, there was more than one Lung Feng aiming their guns at him. If he dared to make the slightest move, he would definitely be riddled with holes. Just based on this, he did not have any other ideas. The only thing he could do was to convince the other party to surrender. Seeing that the Han captives didn't react, Hong Jin could only continue. "What's wrong? Aren't you all Han Chinese? Are you not honest people? Do you really want to be enslaved by us Jiaoji people? Do you really want to be treated unfairly? If you don't want to, then surrender. This way, not only will you not die, you will also be able to live a life of dignity. Isn't this what you want? What are you waiting for? You have already seen the power of the powerful firearms in the mercenaries' hands. I don't mind telling you that this is not their full strength. They also have something called a hand grenade that can be thrown dozens of meters away. Once it lands, it will cause a terrifying explosion. With this, over 10,000 of our Jiaoji elites were wiped out in just 6 hours. Tell me, what do you have to fight with them? You can even do something like surrendering to us Jiaoji. Is there anything wrong with surrendering to the Ming army and the Han? Hurry up and make a decision. Otherwise, I can guarantee that before the sky turns dark, 1/10 of the 40,000 of you will still be alive. That would be extremely fortunate." Hong Jinji tried his best to persuade them. His earnest and well-intentioned appearance made it seem like he was about to kneel down in front of the Han captives. His efforts were not without benefits. At the very least, some of the captives showed signs of loosening up. However, most of them still looked at the four captains. After all, they were their generals. What do we do? Being stared at by so many subordinates, the four captains felt immense pressure. One of them, Zhou Hong, looked at the three people beside him and asked, "The Jiaoji army has already been defeated. What else can we do? Just surrender. After all, this isn't the first time we've done something like this." Captain Ma Hui revealed a mocking smile, as though he was mocking himself and the others for their weakness and lack of determination. "We can surrender, but we should at least talk about some conditions. At the very least, we should be treated as humans. Even though we had no choice but to surrender to the Jiaoji army back then, we had no other choice. Lu Hong, who had just arrived, expressed his opinion. His words caused the other 3 captains to nod in agreement. Clearly, they all had the same thoughts. After the vote, Captain Zhang Qingli took 5 steps forward and said, "We can surrender, but we need to talk to the general of the mercenaries. We need some conditions." But, just as he finished speaking, the sound of a gunshot rang out. Then, the sword at his waist fell from his body and fell to the ground. "You don't have the right to talk about conditions with us. Surrendering means surrendering." Following the gunshot, the political commissar of the 2nd Regiment, Kong Jie's voice rang out. After saying this, he turned to the regiment commander, Luo Pe, and said, "The marksmanship of the Ghost Sniper Squad is truly amazing. In the future, if we have the chance, we should also train a few sharpshooters. They will be very useful." Chapter 473. That's right. He nodded as if he had experienced the same thing. Luo Pe knew that the shot just now was fired by the Ghost Sniper team who had rushed over to provide support. From a distance of at least 700 meters, one shot was able to hit the opponent's saber without hurting anyone. This marksmanship was really amazing. Luo Pe and Kong Jie both sighed at the beauty of this shot, not to mention the Han captives. After witnessing this amazing marksmanship, they were all dumbfounded. Then, their faces were filled with terror. They finally understood why Hong Jin said that they could not defeat the mercenaries. As for Zhang Qingli, who was standing there with a look of fairness, he stood there with a dumbfounded expression. However, when he came back to his senses, it was as if he did not know anything. Just like now, his entire body was trembling. Clearly, he was greatly frightened by this shot. Even the captains were behaving like this, let alone the ordinary soldiers. Out of fear, someone threw down the weapon in his hand and shouted, "Don't shoot me, I surrender." Then, more people threw their weapons to the ground and squatted down. This was like a plague, causing more and more people to throw down their weapons and squat down. After a while, even the captains were squatting down. After all, no one was not afraid of death. Especially when there was no need to fight to the death and there was no great hatred between them, surrendering was not shameful. Close to 40,000 Han captives surrendered just like that, and things went unexpectedly smoothly. Following the 2nd Regiment Commander Luo Pe's order, more and more mercenaries appeared in the surrounding rainforest. They came out in all directions, coming in front of the Han captives and starting to capture them. News of victory could always shake people's hearts. Even Yang Chendong, who had expected things to go smoothly, was so excited when he heard the news from the scouts at the front. Good, since things are going so smoothly, let's carry out the 2nd step of the plan and start moving. Guangnan Prefecture. At this moment, it was already empty. For days after Hong Jin left the city with 10,000 Jiaoji soldiers and 40,000 Han captives, without receiving any news from the front lines, Ruan Gengwang finally couldn't hold himself back and made his move. He could not wait any longer. He led the remaining 30,000 Jiaoji soldiers out of the city and charged toward the Langsun region. It was no wonder that Ruan Gengwang gave up on Guangnan Prefecture. Scouts had reported that Wang Mubin's subordinates in the nearby Shiping were marching toward them. Previously, when he had 100,000 soldiers, he was not afraid of the Mu clan's army. But now, he only had 30,000 soldiers. Even he could not believe that he could still defend Guangnan Prefecture. Rather than putting themselves in danger, it would be better to retreat first and join up with the other troops. Once they had enough strength, they would be able to take back the city. Feeling wronged, Ruan Gengwang led 20,000 soldiers into the Langsun region. The fact that there was no news from 2 armies in a row made him a lot smarter. When the army entered the mountains, they sent out many scouts to scout the situation in front of them and prevent them from falling into a trap set by the mercenaries. But no matter how careful Ruan Gengwang was and how many scouts he sent out, there was no news at all. It was not just the mercenaries. Even the 70,000 men he sent out did not receive any news. It was as if they had all disappeared into thin air. The mercenaries only had 10,000 men. It was possible for them to disappear into the vast rainforest. But what about his 70,000 men? Where did they go? They couldn't have all been killed, right? It had been less than 10 days since the beginning. Even if there were 70,000 pigs in the rainforest, it was impossible for all of them to be captured. Ruan Genwang, who could not figure out what was going on, was frightened. His army slowed down even more. He sent out more and more scouts. Many of them were elites who were very familiar with the rainforest. He did not believe that they could not find any clues. The people who knew the rainforest the best were the Jiaoji people who had lived here since young. With their rich experience and common sense, they did find some useful clues. However, they paid a heavy price for it. For example, every time they were about to find a clue, the scouts they sent out would step on a landmine and be sent to the afterlife. This wasn't the first time such a thing had happened. In fact, it would happen dozens or even hundreds of times in a single day. As a result, every single scout had to be extremely careful when they took a step forward, fearing that they would step on a landmine that could send them to the afterlife. Just like that, they finally found a huge mound of dirt on the 7th day after entering the mountains. Ruan Genwang rushed there and ordered people to dig up the fresh-looking mound of dirt. What they saw were countless corpses. From their clothes to their figures, one could tell that they were all Jiaoji soldiers. As they dug deeper, the mound of dirt grew bigger. On the 10th day, they found Ruan Yongyang's corpse. Although it was badly decomposed, Ruan Genwang still recognized his nephew. He was furious and swore that he would kill the mercenaries to avenge his nephew. Under the loud roar, the scouts found a new clue. They found some traces which should be left behind by the army during their march. Although they tried to cover it up, they were still seen through by the experienced scouts. Looking at the direction of the army, they were heading straight for the capital of Jiaoji, Hanoi. Are you sure that the army is heading towards Hanoi? Ruan Genwang asked with cold sweat on his forehead. He suppressed his sadness when he heard the scouts report. Yes, we are sure that they are heading towards Hanoi, the new scout captain said confidently. But do they really have guts? When Ruan Genwang said these words, there was some admiration in his voice. However, he quickly reacted and said, immediately send the most elite people to inform Hanoi of what happened here. At the same time, inform His Majesty and ask them to prepare to face the enemy. My troops will follow behind and attack from both sides. We will completely kill them in our Jiaoji territory. Ruan Genwang gritted his teeth as he spoke. It was obvious that his nephew's death was a huge blow to him. The scout captain agreed and went to make the arrangements. More than 10 elite scouts immediately rushed towards Hanoi. They wanted to inform the king of the general's intentions as soon as possible so that the country could be better prepared. Xianan Village. This Xianan County of Vietnam's Quang Ninh province was just a village near the sea. The entire village only had about 400 people. With such a population, it was already considered a large village. At this moment, the village was bustling with noise and was very busy. The original natives had all become captives and were being transported to the ships. Along with them were 40,000 Han captives. Needless to say, the ones who could do this were the mercenaries. In fact, their leader Yang Chendong was currently drinking tea in a pavilion by the shore. Beside him were Commander Lu Pe, Political Commissar Kong Jie and the rest. Sitting opposite him was indeed the commander of the 2nd Marine Regiment, Nye Tong. They came from the nearby Yongshire Island. Because Commander Gao Xiong had other missions at sea, Nye Tong had the chance to complete the mission of receiving people and delivering equipment. Naturally, they were referring to the 40,000 Han captives. The more developed Crimson City was, the more insufficient the population was. Many of the newly built factories were operated by one person, or even 3 or 4 people. With the addition of these 40,000 people, the pressure could be alleviated. As for delivering equipment, it was naturally weapons and ammunition. War could not do without such things, especially when the mercenaries were alone. After a battle, who knew how much ammunition and grenades they would use? If they could not replenish them in time, it would be very dangerous. Yang Chendong had long considered this problem and came up with the idea of delivering equipment by the seaside. The equipment was delivered early, and the people were pulled onto the ship. Everything was done in an orderly manner. Only then did Nie Tong have time to sit in front of Yang Chendong. Nie Tong was also one of the earliest people to join Lung Feng. He had followed Gao Xiong to Jianing Mansion to take advantage of the Yang family. After being subdued, he was dead set on following the sixth young master. Furthermore, through his outstanding performance, he became the commander of the 2nd Marine Regiment, a high-ranking officer of the Navy. It seemed that 4 years had passed. Although time had passed, Nie Tong's respect for Yang Chendong had not decreased. On the contrary, it had increased. In particular, Res Ken City was getting bigger and bigger. It would not be long before Ryukyu Island became the base of the 6th young master. At this moment, Nie Tong's heart was filled with respect. Nie Tong, this time you transported so much military equipment, Res Ken City wouldn't have been emptied out, right? Yang Chendong saw that because they had not been in contact with each other for a long time, Nie Tong was somewhat restrained, so he deliberately reduced this feeling of unfamiliarity through chatting. Being called by Yang Chendong, Nie Tong suddenly stood up from his chair. His action made the 2nd Marine Regiment Commander Luo Pe and Political Commissar Kong Jie also quickly stand up. Before, it was Yang Chendong who ordered them to sit, so they had no choice but to sit, but they also felt like they were sitting on pins and needles. Since Nie Tong stood up first, of course they would not continue to sit down. Hey, you guys should sit down. Seeing the 3 people all stand up, Yang Chendong smiled and pointed to the chair. 6th young master, let's stand. It's more comfortable this way. Luo Pe showed a somewhat dumbfounded expression, half pleading. Chapter 474. That's right, that's right. Kong Jie and Nie Tong agreed. Seeing that the 3 of them were of the same mind, Yang Chendong could not force them to do anything. He simply stood up and walked out of the awning. As he looked at the scene of the Han captives being sent to the ships, he said, Nie Tong, you still haven't answered my question. Replying to the 6th young master's question, these military resources will not affect the overall layout of Crimson City. We already knew that the army would expand, so the military factory has already been expanded twice. With the foundation we laid previously, there are many skilled craftsmen. In addition, through our own products, we are constantly exchanging steel and other materials from other countries and regions. Under the circumstances where we have enough raw materials, the production speed of firearms and ammunition has already doubled. For the time being it is enough. Hearing Nie Tong speak about the situation of Crimson City, Yang Chendong was filled with emotions. Very good, but we need to have a sense of danger. We need to use our brains and take the initiative. Don't wait until we need to do something. This kind of passive waiting is not good. How about this? When you return, you must represent this young master to pay respect to those craftsmen working on the front lines. Also, tell Yu Qian to reward those who should be rewarded. Don't be stingy, and don't use the methods he used in Great Ming. If you can't give up the child, you can't trap the wolf. You need to look at the big picture and set your sights further. Yes, this subordinate will remember. Nie Tong nodded his head continuously. Since this was the 6th young master's intention, he naturally had to carry it out. He believed that even Yu Qian, who was in charge of Crimson City's administration, would not oppose this. Speaking of Yu Qian, when he first came to Crimson City, he had a very strong resistance. If not for the safety of his family, he would have thrown himself into the sea to commit suicide. But when he really had nothing to do and started to come into contact with this new city, the more he understood, the more attractive it became. After knowing that this was a government that worked for the welfare of the Han people, and after being enlightened by his family and friends, especially when he saw more and more people smiling brightly, he was finally tempted. Upon learning that Yu Qian intended to contribute, Yang Chendong, who was still in the Yang clan in the north, gave the order to hand over the administrative authority of Crimson City to Yu Qian so that he could take a look. It was only administrative power and did not involve the leadership of the military. No matter what ideas Yu Qian had, he would not be able to stir up any waves. In addition, Yang Chendong had personally given the order, so Yu Qian was appointed as the first city lord of Crimson City. Not long after he became the city lord, The originally chaotic Crimson City was put on the right track and became orderly. Many of the work became more orderly, which attracted the praise of everyone, including the military, who said that the ancients were pedantic. It was only because of their environment that they had no choice but to do certain things. Once they were given a new environment, they would still be able to do a lot of work. This was the formidable side of capable ministers. It was precisely because of Yu Qian in Crimson City that some of the original plans were quickly developed. Coupled with the full cooperation of everyone, Yang Chendong had the ability and strength to fight the war in Jiaoxi. When it came to war, there were simply too many things to pay attention to. There were simply too many things that needed to be prepared, especially when it came to logistics. Since ancient times, there were people who said that war was actually a war of attrition. With sufficient logistical support and a natural advantage in firepower, Yang Chendong decided to make use of this opportunity to enter Jiaoxi and exterminate them. That's right, Yang Chendong had never thought of compromising or taming after conquering. There were too many things he needed to do. It was just a small Jiaoxi, and it wasn't worth his time. Back to the topic, Nie Tong saw that Yang Chendong seemed to be in a good mood. He thought for a while and made up his mind. Sixth young master, do you think that our navy can help in the war against Jiaoxi? If it's really not possible, can we take down the Shang dynasty on Ryukyu Island? Actually, Nie Tong wanted to ask when they would attack Japan. But after thinking about it, with the current strength of Crimson City, even if they took down Japan, they would not have enough people to occupy it. Since that was the case, it was better to put it aside for now. There's no rush. The matter of the Shang dynasty can wait. Right now, we should focus on building the foundation. Without enough people, it would be a waste to take it down now. As for the matter of fighting Jiaoxi, your navy can help. How about this? After sending the people back to Crimson City, you can return and attack Jewel Island first. Then you can take down Haifeng Town. In the future, it will be more convenient for us to lead the army. After that, you can use the advantage of the cannons on your ships to suppress Jiaozhen Prefecture and Renan Prefecture, forcing the Jiaoxi people to not dare to make any moves. If necessary, you can send troops to land directly from the sea and cooperate with the army to occupy the entire Jiaoxi. Hearing Yang Chendong's imposing words, Nie Tong also became very excited. Yes, please rest assured, sixth young master. After transporting these people back, I will lead my 2nd Marine Regiment to carry out your orders. We will also embark on the sea and attack the territories south of Jiaoxi. Yang Chendong nodded. Nie Tong nodded. Nie Tong said excitedly, but he just wanted to participate in the war and contribute more merits. Yang Chendong, who understood this, completely laughed. There's no rush. Everything will depend on the progress of our army before we make a decision. In short, just wait for the news. When we need you all, don't drop the ball. In the previous life, when Yang Chendong was still called Yang Dong, the term drop the ball was often used in the army. Even after coming here, he could not change it. Because of this, when someone asked him what it meant, he would purposely explain it. The general idea was that at the crucial moment, one would lose one's true colors and not be able to perform well, resulting in failure. Nie Tong, who had also heard of the term, drop the ball, immediately patted his chest and said with a tone of assurance, Sixth young master, rest assured, our navy will definitely not drop the ball. Ha, that's good. Yang Chendong's hearty laughter rang out, echoing across the coastline of Xianan village. Yang Chendong had already escorted the 40,000 Han captives to Xianan village, completely shaking off their pursuers. However, Ruan Gengwang, who knew nothing about this, was still excited because he thought that he had captured the main force of the mercenaries. That's right, the scouts of the Jiaoxi army were quite capable. Regardless of whether the clues were intentionally left behind or accidentally discovered, they had their eyes on a group of mercenaries, which was the 3 battalions Yang Chendong had purposely left behind to act as a distraction. The one in charge of leading the way and attracting the enemy's attention was the commander of the 3 battalions, Cold Front 1st Battalion Commander Wu Sheng. Accompanying him on this mission were 4 companies under his command and 2 battalions of auxiliary soldiers. In total, there were 12 companies of 1,200 soldiers. A team of 1,200 people was not small, especially when they separated. Yang Chendong had purposely used most of the ammunition on them. With their strength, even if they were to face off against the 30,000 people led by Ruan Gengwang, they would still have the confidence to fight. However, Wu Sheng did not do so. He knew what his mission was, which was to attract the attention of the Jiaoji army. As long as he could lure them out and successfully make them stay in the Langsun region, it would be a great achievement. In order to achieve this goal, he did not move very quickly and purposely left behind all sorts of clues. Even when he was cooking, he made many stoves, giving off the feeling that he was the main force. Ruan Gengwang, who did not understand the mercenaries at all, did not know. He had only seen the traces left behind by the enemy along the way and thought that he had caught a big fish. Furthermore, the enemy had been constantly running and had not faced him head-on once. This created a misconception that after the two battles, the enemy had suffered heavy losses and should not have the ability to fight with him. Since there was such an opportunity to beat the enemy while they were down, how could he not grasp it? Not only did he lead 30,000 men to chase after the mercenaries, he also sent someone to report to the king, requesting them to send out troops as well. He wanted to eliminate the mercenaries who dared to intrude into the Langsun region. When the news reached the ears of King Li, he was naturally shocked. When the great Ming dynasty was on the verge of falling apart, there was actually someone who dared to have designs on him. This was truly out of his expectations. Since there was someone who did not know life from death, he did not mind fulfilling their wishes. In fact, in order to show off his strength, he even sent out his general, Chen Heijin. The Chen family was the second largest family in Jiaoji. Chen Heijin was also one of the top figures in the Chen family. However, after he became famous, he completely sided with the Li family. This caused him to be known as Chen Haizi due to his ruthlessness. This time, when he found out that there were enemies who dared to enter the Langsun region, and with the king's orders, how could he be courteous? He immediately led his 30,000 elite troops, known as the Black Soldiers, to the north of Hanoi. Not only did he want to stop the mercenaries from entering Jiaoji, he also wanted to use this opportunity to wipe them all out. With just 3 battalions of soldiers, Wu Sheng was able to mobilize 60,000 soldiers. In addition to the 20,000 Jiaoji soldiers who had died in battle, it was equivalent to holding back 80,000 soldiers. For Jiaoji, which only had around 300,000 soldiers, this was enough to lure the tiger away from the mountain. Since the tiger had been lured out, it was time to enter the tiger's den. After resting in Xianan village for 2 days and sending the 40,000 soldiers away, Yang Chendong brought his 20 battalions and 5 companies of soldiers to Chu-Yi City. Chapter 475. In order to avoid being discovered by others, especially when he knew that Jiaoji also had ships that were relatively small in comparison, he did not bring his army along the coastline. He even gave up on Hongji City and Haifeng City, which were easier to traverse, and went straight through the rainforest. Thanks to the specialized training they had received beforehand and the fact that the soldiers were fully equipped, they were not afraid of the poisonous insects in the forest. Although the journey was a little tiring, there were no accidents. In just 3 days, they arrived at the forest 10 miles outside of Chu-Yi City. The scouts had already been sent out. All that was left was to wait for news. Yang Chendong ordered the army to rest on the spot. Other than using their own small pots to cook instant noodles, they were not allowed to light any open fires. After eating and drinking their fill, they were to sleep immediately to replenish their energy. Yang Chendong had already made a decision. They would launch a surprise attack tonight and take down Chu-Yi City. Now, all they had to do was wait for the reports from the scouts. Those who did well would be rewarded and those who did wrong would be punished. This was the iron rule of the management of the cold front. During the battle in the rainforest, many soldiers had contributed greatly and were promoted. Scout Su Yunxing was one of them. Due to his outstanding performance, especially when he hit Ruan Yongyang, Yang Chendong's plan could be carried out better. He was promoted from the position of squad leader to platoon leader. Don't underestimate this promotion, and don't underestimate the fact that it was just a platoon commander position. Once Su Yunxing entered the Cold Vanguard, he could easily be promoted to a company commander. On the other hand, if he entered the auxiliary troops, he could easily become a battalion commander. This was what it meant to be one rank higher. For example, if the soldiers in charge of protecting Yang Chendong in the 1st and 2nd Guards wanted to leave the company, they would at least be promoted to platoon leader. Once they displayed sufficient management skills, it was not impossible for them to be promoted to company commander or even battalion commander. Su Yunxing, who was promoted, was full of enthusiasm. This time, he took the lead in infiltrating Chu-Yi City to investigate. Under his skillful command and the excellent performance of the scouts, the situation in the city was quickly dug out. They even dared to kidnap a lone centurion. Since they knew that everything was going well, they might launch a night attack on Chu-Yi City tonight. They just wanted to capture an insignificant centurion and make him disappear for a few hours. There shouldn't be any problems. It was from this captured centurion that they found out more about Chu-Yi City. They even drew a detailed map of the Jiaoji army's military strength distribution and sent it back to the scouts. Looking at the freshly drawn military topographic map in his hand, Yang Chendong couldn't help but be overjoyed. He exclaimed, "Good!" There was a saying called, "God bestows rice." It referred to certain people who were born to eat a bowl of rice in a certain industry. Su Yunxing, for example, gave Yang Chendong the feeling that he was born to be a scout. Of course, this was not all due to the scouts. If the people from the Security Bureau had not infiltrated Chu-Yi City in advance and lived here for a period of time, they would not even have a safe place to stay in the city. How would they be able to carry out their work so smoothly? Yang Chendong's face was full of joy and even a little excited. When Hong Jin saw this, he felt a myriad of emotions. Hong Jin was a captive general. Although he really wanted to die a heroic death like Ruan Yongyang, when he thought of the responsibility he bore and the fact that the Hong family had the upper hand at the last moment, he survived without any dignity. For a surrendered general like this, if it were any other opponent, they would first ask you some questions. Once they obtained what they wanted to know, you would be like a piece of bone without any flesh. That was the result of being abandoned. If the result was better, you might be able to barely survive. However, you could forget about your dignity. If the result was worse, it was normal to be killed after using up all your dignity. After all, you surrendered and were allowed to live for a few more days, which was considered to be doing you a favor. However, when it came to Hong Jin, it was completely different. Not only had he not been abandoned, he'd instead obtained a certain level of respect. It was even to the extent that Yang Chendong had promised him that he'd ensure the safety of his Hong clan, and if his performance was good, then Yang Chendong might even consider entrusting him with an important task. Being able to keep the family safe, although it was not wealth, already made Hong Jin very excited. Not to mention that there might be better opportunities to display his talents in the future. In the past few days, he had been walking in the dense forest with the mercenaries. After witnessing their valiant marching speed and the powerful firearms in their hands countless times, Hong Jin smiled bitterly in his heart. When he thought about how he had thought of eliminating the mercenaries with the advantage of numbers, now it seemed that he really did not know the immensity of heaven and earth. The strength of the mercenaries, especially their iron-like military discipline, and the sense of harmony between the soldiers, was something that Hong Jin had seen more than once. After the soldiers had gone to bed, Yang Chendong personally went to patrol the camp. He even saw him personally covering the soldiers with blankets that were kicked off by their feet. Hong Jin still remembered how shocked he was when he saw that scene. He had never thought of such a thing before. He had never seen any general in Jiaoji do such a thing. Most generals would indulge themselves in wine and women at night. Occasionally, there would be a few self-disciplined ones who would go to bed early. Who would think of the ordinary soldiers? It was no wonder that he could lead this mercenary army to become invincible. Just based on his heart and pressure, Hong Jin was far inferior to the generals he had met. For a moment, Hong Jin even had a thought. Could he seek refuge with Yang Chendong? He had a feeling that such a person would be able to achieve great things. If he could grab hold of him earlier, he might be able to make a name for himself. When he brought up this thought when he followed Yang Chendong, The sixth young master pondered for a moment before replying, "It's good that you have the intention to seek refuge with us. However, it will be difficult for you to achieve the same status as the Han people. At most, you will only be a general in a second-rate army. No matter how hard you work, it will still be the same. Are you still willing?" Hong Jin agreed without hesitation. He could tell that the sixth young master cared a lot about the Han people and the Ming people. In comparison, he would not treat the other races equally. However, it did not matter. If he could become a general in a second-rate army, it should be a very prestigious thing. At least he would be able to ensure the safety of the Hong family. Hong Jin revealed his intention to seek refuge. Naturally, he did not hide anything from the rest of the work. Through his words, Yang Chendong had a more detailed understanding of the situation in Jiaoxi. It was as if his primary target was Chu-Yi City. It was also because he heard Hong Jin's words that he knew that the general guarding Chu-Yi City was an idiot. He was just relying on the fact that he had the most powerful bloodline of the Li family. He was used to abusing others. Because of this, the soldiers in the city lacked training and did not have any actual combat power. With such a weak enemy, Yang Chendong decided to choose this place as the breakthrough point. He would attack from here and then throw a big stone into the clear water of Jiaoxi to mess up the situation and find a better opportunity to attack. His suggestion was accepted. This was an attitude of trust. Hong Jin was naturally overjoyed. He thought that he had made a contribution. However, when he saw the map of Chu-Yi City sent back by the scouts, he took a deep breath. At this moment, he knew that even if he did not say those words, the other party would still be able to understand the situation in the city clearly. For a moment, he had to keep a low profile. He no longer dared to consider himself as a meritorious person. After the map of the city was brought over, Yang Chendong immediately called for a meeting with the regiment commanders and battalion commanders. They began to distribute their respective tasks. Under Yang Chendong's military orders, in less than an hour, all the troops had received the tasks that they were supposed to do. Everyone knows what they are supposed to do, right? After distributing the tasks, Yang Chendong stood under the tree that was called the temporary headquarters and looked at the more than 20 regimental and battalion commanders surrounding him. "Yes." With a low voice, all the commanders replied in unison. "Very good." Yang Chendong also spoke in a suppressed voice. His voice did not need to be too loud as only the commanders could hear him. When you attack and occupy Chu-Yi City, you must remember that you can kill the soldiers and civilians who resist. As for those who surrender, there is no need to kill too much. What we lack the most now is people. Sixth young master, what if the commoners resist with all their might? A battalion commander of the auxiliary barracks asked. He had heard before that when the great Ming dynasty attacked and occupied Jiaoxi in the past, the entire population was a soldier. Sometimes, even the children of the elderly would fight back with all their might. This caused the great Ming army to suffer quite a bit. Didn't I say just now? As long as they resist, regardless of their identity, kill them. When Yang Chendong said this, he recalled the self-defense counterattack in his previous life. At that time, who knew how many lovely people had died in the hands of the elderly, women, and children? However, even so, he still forgave them in the spirit of humanitarianism. Yang Chendong would learn from the experience of his predecessors. If these people did not resist and obediently listen to him, it would be fine. However, if they wanted to resist and hurt his soldiers, then sorry, he would have to kill 100 of them. In any case, in this era, the spread of information was very slow. There was no need to worry about how others would criticize you. As for human rights, even the great Ming dynasty divided people into different grades and ranks. What the hell is human rights? Chapter 476. Of course, he would only kill those who resisted. He would not kill those who surrendered. Firstly, he did not want Leng Feng to become a cold-blooded killing machine. Secondly, the current development required a large number of people. This hole would be filled by conquering Jiaoxi. With Yang Chendong's reiteration, all the officers understood what they had to do next. They immediately turned around and made their preparations. Yang Chendong did not forget to tell Hong Jin, who was watching from the side, "You are from Jiaoji. If possible, you can do more of everyone's work. I will arrange a squad of soldiers to protect you from harm." "Thank you, Duke of Loyalty. Hong Jin will do his best." Hong Jin replied respectfully. After all, he was just an external general. He did not even have the right to address Yang Chendong as the sixth young master. He could only address him as Duke of Loyalty to show his allegiance. The sky was getting darker. Lung Feng, the auxiliary soldiers, and the temporary auxiliary soldiers had already rested and were making their own preparations. The next thing they needed to do was to wait until the time was up before they began to attack the city. It was not accurate to say that they were attacking the city. This was because at midnight, when many people had already fallen asleep, the south gate of Chu-Yi City was opened from the inside. Then, a bright torch circled the city gate 3 times. This was the signal to enter the city. It meant that Su Yunxing and the scouts had taken control of the city gate. The Yang family troops who were already prepared entered the city in an orderly manner. After they carefully entered the city gate, they were led by the scouts who were already prepared and rushed to their respective destinations. After entering the city, they went straight to their target. Everything was done in an orderly manner. Many people did not know that the army had entered the city. It was not until gunshots were heard from the granary where the military supplies were stored that the whole city became lively. Li Jia was the general of Chu-Yi City who had the bloodline of the Li family. While he was still lying on the big warm bed with a beauty lying beside him, the door of the bedroom was suddenly pushed open from the outside. This movement instantly woke him up, and he shouted loudly, "Who is it?" "General, General, someone has broken into the city. Let's run." The ones who came were the guards of the general's mansion. To be able to become a general's bodyguard, they were naturally 1 in 100. Their vigilance had always been stronger than ordinary citizens and soldiers. When the city suddenly became chaotic, they felt that something was wrong. When they came out of the residence and came to the street, they vaguely saw an army approaching. They knew that it must be the enemy. After all, it was impossible for friendly forces to enter the city in the middle of the night without even saying hello. It was precisely because they knew that it might be the enemy that they rushed into the general's bedroom and shouted without regard for their status. Enemy? Where did the enemy come from? Li, who was still not fully awake, asked in confusion. But just as he finished speaking, before the guards could even open their mouths to explain, a very crisp gunshot suddenly rang out from the courtyard. The moment the gunshot rang out, the few people in the bedroom instantly felt their hair stand on end. They did not expect the enemy to break into the residence so quickly. Li, who was startled by the gunshot, was stunned for a moment. He did not ask any more questions and hurriedly put on the clothes he threw on the side of the bed. As he was putting on his clothes, he shouted, "What are you all standing there for? Hurry up and gather your men. Open up a bloody path for the general." Li Jia was still shouting when the sounds of killing and gunshots outside were getting closer and closer. Just as he finished putting on his clothes and did not forget to hang his sword on his body, the guards outside the house started wailing one after another. As the only general's residence in the city, it was naturally the focus of attention. The ones carrying out this mission were Chen Bo's troops from the 2nd Battalion of the 2nd Regiment of the Cold Vanguard. First, they completely surrounded the place. Then, they broke down the door and entered the mansion. Once they entered, anyone who raised their weapons and refused to surrender, regardless of who they were, whether they were male or female, old or young, they were all shot to death. The 95 style continued to spew out tongues of fire in the night. Soon, the number of Jiaoji soldiers who fell under the muzzle of their guns increased to 100. Under the waves of gunshots, the people finally became obedient. They knew that the people who came were not joking with them. Some of the more courageous ones who were afraid of death threw their weapons to the ground and squatted on the ground obediently, becoming captives. After a series of gunshots outside the door, a few tall figures rushed into the bedroom and saw General Li Jia trembling all over. Li Jia was only promoted because of his family's connections. He had never fought a proper battle before. How could he have seen such a scene? Seeing the guard who reported the situation to him just now lying in front of him covered in blood, his mind was completely blank. He did not know what to do. Remove his weapon. Although the cold vanguard did not know Li Jia and did not know what he looked like, they could tell that he was a big fish just by looking at his clothes. The squad leader who rushed in immediately grabbed Li Jia's sword and pressed him to the ground. Following the capture of Li Jia and the capture of the general's residence, the entire Chu-Yi city basically gave up all resistance. From the beginning to the end, it only took 3 hours to take control of the city. When Yang Chendong entered Chu-Yi city under the protection of the 1st and 2nd guards, the city had already been completely taken over. Other than the Yang family soldiers who were cleaning up the bloodstains and corpses on the streets, there was only one soldier who was standing guard 20 meters away. Luopa had also brought a group of officers to wait for Yang Chendong. When he saw the 6th young master coming over, he jogged forward to report the results of the battle. Reporting to the 6th young master, the entire Chu-Yi city is already under our control. Right now, the 4 gates are tightly shut. Without orders, no one can leave. The general of Chu-Yi city, Li Jia, has also been captured alive by us and is now being locked up in their residence. In this battle, we have killed approximately 1,300 people who resisted and seized all kinds of military resources. Listening to Luopo's report, Yang Chendong nodded from time to time. After the other party finished, he said happily, "Very good, you have done well. Your military achievements will be recorded and you will be rewarded according to your contributions. By the way, how are our casualties?" Reporting to the 6th young master, "We only injured a dozen temporary auxiliary soldiers. No one died in the battle." When he said this, Luopo was still very excited. Not bad. Hearing that there were no soldiers who died in the battle, Yang Chendong's face flashed with obvious satisfaction. Nowadays, the soldiers were more and more able to keep up with the rhythm of the war. During the battle in the forest of Lang's Sun, more than 20 auxiliary soldiers and temporary auxiliary soldiers were killed or injured. To be able to win this battle with 0 casualties was enough to make people feel gratified. Seeing that Yang Chendong was in a good mood, Political Commissar Kong Jie, who was standing at the side, hesitated for a moment before taking a small step forward to report. "6th young master, we have found many Han people in the city. They're not living well. Many of them don't even have clothes to cover their bodies. What do you want to do with them?" Yang Chendong's originally gratified and happy expression completely disappeared at this moment. He thought that the Han people in the outside world would not be living well, but it was out of his expectations that they could not even wear clothes. "How many people are there?" Yang Chendong's voice sounded in a low voice. "We have roughly calculated, there are about 1,000 people. There should be some that we have not found yet." After all this time, their main objective was to attack and occupy the city. They really did not have much time to observe other things. "Where are they? Bring me to them." When Yang Chendong heard that there were so many people and that not all of them were found, his frown deepened. According to Hong Jin and the information sent by the Security Bureau, Chu-Yi City was not very busy. Even the entire population of the city was only 20 to 30,000 people, and this was in addition to the 2,000 city guards. However, there were more than 1,000 people who were captured. Wouldn't that be 20 to 30% of the total population? It was definitely not a small number. Yang Chendong wanted to take a look at the captured Han people. Kong Jie originally wanted to stop him, but he thought that there were some things that should be seen clearly by the young master. This would be of great help to the 6th young master. He nodded and led the way. Under the protection of a group of Lung Feng, Yang Chendong turned 2 corners and arrived in front of a large courtyard. Looking at the courtyard, he knew that this was the place where the Han people gathered. Kong Jie was extremely meticulous with his arrangements. By placing the Han people here, he could prevent them from being harmed by the other Jiaoji people. When they arrived at the entrance of the courtyard, Political Commissar Kong Jie's footsteps were obviously heavy. He turned back and looked at Yang Chendong and said, "6th young master, you have to be mentally prepared." "Go and I am ready." Yang Chendong's expression did not change. In his previous life, he had completed a mission in the war-torn lands of Africa. What kind of people had he not seen before? Although Yang Chendong thought that he had seen a lot, When he really entered the courtyard and saw the Han people sitting around the bonfire, his strong spirit was greatly shaken. What he saw could no longer be considered as humans. If he had to compare them, they were like apes that had not fully evolved. Yes, they were weak and skinny. They were as thin as firewood, and their eyes were wide open. They were looking at Yang Chendong and his group with fear. These people were generally not tall, and some of the adults were obviously hunched over. This was clearly the side effect of working hard for a long time, and their bodies could not bear the burden. There were also some old people who not only had dark skin, but their bodies were also extremely thin and weak. Looking at the small half of their arms that were exposed when they put on the unsuitable clothes that they had found from God knows where, they were probably not much thicker than a 6 or 7-year-old child. Chapter 477. There were also a small number of children. They were extremely thin and weak. At a glance, one could tell that they were malnourished and their body proportions were severely out of balance. There was also a young man who looked like he was 6 or 7 years old. He weighed less than 15 kilograms. His large head formed a stark contrast with his small body. If there was a video camera here, if this scene could be recorded and shown to the other Han people, the women would cry nonstop, and even the men would feel very uncomfortable. Just like the group of people standing beside Yang Chendong. Many of them had tears in their eyes. Some of them even had bloodshot eyes. They looked as if they were about to kill someone. These Jiaoji people deserved to be hacked to death. Tiger's mane was very close to Yang Chendong. Others might have considered the presence of the 6th young master and would hesitate to say something. However, Tiger's mane did not need to. He directly said what was on his mind. With him taking the lead, the other people immediately followed suit. They were all cursing the Jiaoji people. Some even scolded the great Ming dynasty. These people were all kidnapped by the Jiaoji people. To think that they kept saying that the world was peaceful and the people were rich. If that was the case, why didn't they save their own people? To let them suffer here, was this something a great country would do? Yang Chendong was also in a bad mood. However, he knew that similar things did not only happen in Jiaoji but also in other small countries. Not all Han people were respected, and not all Han people lived with dignity. It was just like the memories in his mind. The status of the Asians in the future was not high. They even felt inferior to the Asians. They felt that they could not compare to the Europeans. Even if the country was strong, this mentality was still in the hearts of many people. It was precisely because the country was not strong enough that it was impossible to talk about fairness in many things. Whether it was in the military, science and technology, or business and agriculture, this could be especially reflected. However, since he was blessed by the heavens and came to this world, and brought along the most powerful song, Yang Chendong was determined to change this fate and situation. What he wanted was that no matter where he went in the future, as long as he said that he was a Han, people would look up to him. As long as he said that he was a Han, people would not have any thoughts of bullying him. On the contrary, they should be the ones feeling inferior. For this goal, Yang Chendong was willing to fight for the rest of his life, even if it was destined to be a long process. Give them enough food and clothing, then invite them to the largest square in the city tomorrow morning. Yang Chendong gritted his teeth as he finished speaking. Then he turned around and left. Clearly, he was unwilling to stay in such an environment for even a moment longer. It wasn't that he despised these poor Han people, but he was afraid that he wouldn't be able to stop himself from slaughtering all the Jiaoji people in the city. Behind him was a group of Lung Feng's higher-ups and guards. Compared to when they first arrived, their expressions were solemn and even frighteningly cold. A ruthless aura was naturally emitted from their bodies. Even after they left the courtyard and arrived at the main street, the auxiliary soldiers and temporary soldiers in charge of guarding the place could still clearly feel a monstrous killing intent. In the past, some of the officers of Lung Feng felt that it was inhumane for the 6th young master to want to exterminate Jiaoji. After all, the influence of the doctrine of the golden mean over the years wasn't ineffective. They were particular about harmony and wealth, about not leaving a line for others so that they could meet again. They were particular about being merciful and forgiving, and about winning people over with virtue. However, when they saw the scene of the Han people living in the city, their thoughts changed and were shaken. Since others didn't treat the Han people as humans, then don't blame the Han people for not treating you as humans. You brought this upon yourselves. Since you committed this sin, then you have to pay for it yourself. And such thoughts were constantly accumulating. Slowly, it would form a huge doubt that would eventually explode. The next morning, the meeting at the largest plaza in Chu-Yi City was the trigger point that Yang Chendong prepared for everyone. It wasn't enough for him to prosper the Han people alone. He needed the support and approval of more people. Although he could use his authority to force Lung Feng to do so, there was still a hint of coercion in the end. It wasn't something that everyone was willing to do. This would make it hard for things to be handled and carried out at a lower level. Yang Chendong hoped that he wasn't the only one who saw this point. Others would also see this point and willingly submit to him. That way, he would be able to achieve twice the result with half the effort. Under Yang Chendong's orders, all the civilians and captured soldiers in Chu-Yi City were rushed to the plaza the next day. When they arrived, a temporary wooden platform had already been set up. In the center of the plaza, there were a few huge wooden pillars with people tied up. Any civilian who had lived in this city before could recognize that the person tied up in the middle of the wooden pillars was General Chu-Yi Lija. As a member of the Li family, Lija had been tyrannical ever since he came to Chu-Yi City. Not only would he bully the Han people, he would also oppress the Jiaoji civilians as much as possible. This caused his reputation to be very bad. However, who asked him to be a member of the Li family? Most people were angry but didn't dare to say anything. So when they saw him tied up there, many people, including many Jiaoji civilians, were very happy. This was what they meant by, those who commit too much injustice will bring about their own destruction. If one day you separated yourself from the people and always put yourself on a pedestal, then the day you fall would not be far away. The person tied up in the middle was Lija. On his two sides were his loyal subordinates and some black-hearted merchants in the city. It was precisely because of their protection that the common people's lives were so miserable and grievances could be heard everywhere. Because of this, even though there were more than 30,000 people in Jiaoji near the plaza, there wasn't much chaos. This made some of the officers who went to the courtyard last night feel like they couldn't vent their anger. More and more people gathered. Even some Jiaoji soldiers were brought here. Compared to the civilians, who were still relatively free, they were much more miserable. There were 20 people tied up on a rope. They were brought here with their bodies pressed against each other. It was as if they were wearing candied haws on a stick. Behave yourselves. Kill anyone who doesn't behave. The Lung Feng soldiers who were watching over them spoke with ferocious expressions, causing the Jiaoji soldiers who had witnessed their might to become extremely obedient. Even when they saw their general tied up on a wooden pillar, not a single one of them had any intention of stepping forward. Compared to the state of these captives, the treatment of the 2,000 Han commoners was much better. They could stand near the nearest wooden stake, and even eat the breakfast given by the army while gesturing with their fingers. They appeared to be very comfortable and relaxed. That's right. After the night, when the count of Han people started in the morning, there were a few hundred more people. There were a total of 2,000 Han people. These people spent the night in apprehension. Even though they knew that Sui City had changed hands and that it was very likely that the Ming army was coming, they didn't dare to take the initiative to step forward. After all, the Ming army was the Ming army, who said that they would definitely stand up for them. It was only this morning that more of the villagers found them and told them about how they had been treated the previous night. They had food, drinks, and even a good night's sleep. Only then did everyone start to believe them. More people started to come out. Now, they gathered together and wanted to see what these Han soldiers who claimed that they weren't part of the Ming army were going to do. Under the watchful eyes of everyone, Yang Chendong appeared on the platform under the protection of the guards. This uniform was custom-made by the clothing factory in Qichen City. It was different from the one Yang Chendong wore during the military parade. This time, it was golden in color. The golden threads sewn on it were all real, causing it to be several times heavier than normal clothes. Naturally, when it was worn, It shone with a golden light and looked very beautiful. In the eyes of the old men in Chichen, the sixth young master was their sky, their king, and their emperor. Naturally, he was worthy of wearing such a uniform. Perhaps this was the thinking of the feudal society. Since he was the only emperor and king, he must wear gold to show it. If it wasn't for Yang Chendong's firm resistance, he was afraid that a golden dragon would be embroidered on the uniform. Thinking about it, this uniform was really no different from an emperor's robe. It could be seen how much these people hoped that Yang Chendong could become the emperor and lead them forward. Now, this golden robe was empty on his body. After borrowing the style of the commander's uniform, it made the young man's heroic figure appear even more upright. When he appeared, his superior aura naturally manifested, causing the originally noisy square to immediately quiet down. This was exactly what Yang Chendong wanted to see. As he stretched his hand behind him, Beta Persei arrogantly brought out a loudspeaker that he had specially rushed out last night. This could play a better role in amplifying the sound. Holding the loudspeaker in his hand, Yang Chendong looked at the more than 40,000 soldiers in the square. He felt extremely excited and shouted majestically, "Long live Lung Feng! Long live the auxiliary soldiers! Long live the temporary auxiliary soldiers! Long live, long live, long live!" After a moment of silence, the sound of an earth-shattering echo echoed. Although shouting "Long live" here, there was no emperor appearing and it was a bit out of place, but it was undeniable that this shout stirred up the atmosphere of the more than 10,000 soldiers. Chapter 478. The excited shouts seemed to be contagious, causing many citizens of Jiaoji to have the urge to shout as well. This was human nature. Most of the time, things had nothing to do with them. However, when the people around them were doing the same, they would follow suit. There was no need to ask why, because there was no reason at all. After more than a dozen shouts, Yang Chendong once again placed the megaphone by his mouth. The crowd suddenly quieted down. It was so uniform that it created a huge psychological pressure. This kind of pressure was something that those who had never experienced personally would never be able to experience. Brave warriors, with your combined efforts, we have finally stepped into the Jiaoji nation today. Chu-Yi City is the first city that we have conquered, but it will definitely not be the last. It will not be long before we set foot on this entire nation and completely trample them under our feet. Long live, long live. As soon as his voice fell, tens of thousands of people shouted in unison, shaking the eardrums of everyone present. The megaphone was raised again and the sound was suppressed. Then, Yang Chendong looked at the crowd and began his speech for the day. The rise and fall of the nation is the responsibility of every man. In the long river of history, there are countless heroic deeds. Patriotic figures are shining like stars. During the Warring States period, there was the great patriotic poet Chu Yuan, the national hero Yu Fei, Wen Tianxiang, and so on. They were loyal to the motherland and loved the people. They were not afraid of demotion or sacrifice. They were loyal to the nation and loved the people. They were not afraid of demotion or sacrifice. However, today, I do not wish to talk about how glorious we were in the past, nor do I wish to talk about how great the ancients were. Because right in front of us are our fellow countrymen who have been victimized. Everyone, please take a look at them now. Do they have any pride as Han people? Could it be that when you look at them, you can feel the pride of being a soldier? As he spoke, Yang Chendong pointed at the 2,000 Han people in front of him. Most of them had already put on new clothes with the help of Lung Feng. At the very least, they could cover their skin and prevent it from being exposed. But those clothes were obviously new, and they didn't fit her at all. Moreover, even if she was wearing clothes, it still couldn't prevent everyone from seeing her thin body underneath. Their emaciated faces were telling everyone that they were not doing well at all. Just as everyone was looking at the 2,000 Hans with their own thoughts, Yang Chendong's voice sounded out once more, "No. This is our disgrace. Every day, we proclaim that the world is peaceful and prosperous, but we can't even guarantee the safety and lives of our own people. How can the grand great Ming dynasty have the face to say that? If I must say, they are not fit for the job. They are unqualified. They took the taxes that the people worked hard to pay for nothing. They let the people place their hopes on them for nothing. They became rulers for nothing. They are incompetent. If they can't even protect their own people, how can they talk about peace and prosperity? How can they talk about being a great country? How can they talk about caring for the world? What's even more hateful is that every time a country comes to the capital to pay respects to the emperor, they still have the face to take out large amounts of gold and silver and give them back. They even say that they are friends for generations and that this is the style of a great country. If we let them see the situation of our own people outside, I wonder if they will feel ashamed? Perhaps, perhaps not. However, we cannot place our hopes on them anymore. Since they are sitting in their high positions and not doing anything, then let's get out of the way and let those who are willing to do the work. And we are the people who are willing to do the work. At the very least, with our hard work, we will be able to let more of our own people live better and more dignified lives. At the very least, with our hard work, we will not be bullied or treated unfairly by others. At the very least, with our hard work, the Han people will become the true rulers of the world. Any kind people who want to be on good terms with the Han people will also be able to live a good life. When Yang Chendong spoke up to this point, he had already revealed his ambition. It was as if he did not put the great Ming dynasty in his eyes. However, the young family soldiers did not feel that there was anything wrong. In their opinion, no one was stronger than their sixth young master. Since that was the case, it would be best for the sixth young master to lead them. As for those who objected, they would have to experience the power of the guns in their hands. Even if you were made of iron, you would still be blasted into a sieve. Yang Chendong's speech continued. When he talked about personal dignity, he pointed at the Lung Feng brothers who were maintaining order and said, "They are the greatest army. What others can't do, they can do. What others can't think of, they can think of. In the future, with them around, we, the Han people, will become the strongest and most unique people in the world. No matter where we go, we will be respected by others. All the things that others have forced on us in the past, we will take it back 10 times, 100 times, 1,000 times. Today, we will start with the enemies in Chu Yi City who are hostile to the Han people. Men, bring down the daggers." Under Yang Chendong's shout, a company of 100 Lung Feng soldiers each carried a plate out. On each plate, there was a dagger. There were a total of 1,000 daggers. This was the gift that Yang Chendong had prepared for the Han people. Didn't the ancients say that those who were evil to the core deserved to be stabbed 1,000 times? Well then, today was the real version. After the daggers were taken down, Yang Chendong looked at the 2,000 Han people with an encouraging gaze. Next, we will read out the crimes. After you are convicted, you can take revenge. There are 1,000 daggers here. 1,000 of you can take them and cut the bodies of those who have bullied you in the past. Believe me, no one will convict you. Your actions are completely legal and reasonable. However, do you dare to do so? At the end of his speech, Yang Chendong's tone had become a kind of questioning, but more importantly, he was still guiding them. After being questioned by Yang Chendong, the 2,000 Han people who originally thought that they were here to watch the show were at a loss for words. These people were used to being bullied and treated like humans. Some of them were even born like this. Ever since they could understand things, there was a thought that told them that they were the most lowly people and deserved to be bullied like cattle or horses. Now that there was a possibility that this might change, of course, they would feel uncomfortable. The 2,000 people looked at each other. The children looked at the adults, and the adults looked at the elderly. No one made a decision immediately. What? You don't even have the courage to take revenge on your enemies? Yang Chendong had long expected this scene. After all, many years of habits were not something that could be easily changed. However, when he saw that these people were still so hesitant despite his support, he was somewhat disappointed. Yang Chendong was disappointed. Because of this, there was a sense of loss in his eyes. This scene was seen by the 2,000 people. Although they had only known each other for a short time, at most, it was only the second time that they had met. However, they could truly feel that this seemingly powerful young man was biased towards them. Everything that he did was for their own good. Since he was doing it for their own good, they could not let such a good person down. With this thought in mind, two middle-aged men in the crowd finally responded. However, because of the years of oppression, they were still a little timid. Even when they responded to Yang Chendong, their voices were not very loud. If the sixth young master had not been staring at these people, he would not have been able to hear what they were saying. "We dare." "You what?" Seeing that someone finally took the initiative to step forward, Yang Chendong stared at the two men with encouraging eyes. As if infected by Yang Chendong's emotions, the two men first looked at each other, and then their tone became firmer. "We dare to take these daggers to take revenge on our enemies." "Good. Beta Persei, send the daggers to the two of them." Yang Chendong immediately agreed, and Beta Persei quickly took two daggers and sent them to the two men. When the two of them really held a dagger in their trembling hands, this scene deeply stimulated the others behind them. Immediately, the men and women who also said they dared to step forward. It was only 1,000 daggers, and they were quickly distributed. Some of the children wanted to have a dagger, but it was already gone. This was because Yang Chendong considered that they were still young and did not want to do it personally. He did not want to leave any bad memories in their hearts. Therefore, he only took out 1,000 daggers. With these 1,000 daggers and the protection of the strong Lung Feng, these Han people who had been bullied for many years finally had the courage to rush to the wooden platform and cut Lijia's body with their daggers. Instead of stabbing, they cut. This was to end Lijia's life by 1,000 cuts. It had to be said that this method was a bit cruel. This could be distinguished from his wailing and howling. But at the same time, it was also a way to vent their hatred. This could be seen from the faces of the people who waved their daggers. Not only did they vent their anger, but they also took the opportunity to hold their heads high. Their courage seemed to have increased a lot at this moment, and confidence shrouded them. Chapter 479. In the following period of time, Lija was not the only one who enjoyed such treatment. The other influential people in Chu-Yi City who were tied up with him also enjoyed the treatment. Their status and identity were mostly obtained by oppressing the Han people. Now, it was time for them to reap the benefits. The screams on the small platform became louder and louder, causing the people of Jiaoji who were forced to watch the execution to feel their scalps go numb. Because of this, there was some chaos. Some people even wanted to take the opportunity to resist and instigate others to attack the mercenaries. Since they were already prepared, the sharpshooters of the cold front quickly found the troublemakers. The sound of the 95 style was heard from afar. After killing dozens of leaders, the chaotic scene was completely suppressed. After seeing the soldiers shoot and kill without any explanation, everyone became more obedient for the sake of their own lives. Although they became obedient, it did not mean that they would be let off. As the next step was carried out, under the testimony of the Han people, the people of Jiaoji who had bullied them were pulled out from the crowd one by one. Then, they would be put on public trial based on the mistakes they had made. Those who were too vicious were beheaded on the spot. Those who did not commit too serious of a crime were sentenced to a term of imprisonment and would be brought to Qiqian City in the future. As more and more people from Jiaoji were brought out, some of the other people were regretting it while some were rejoicing. Those who regretted it were those who had mistreated the Han people. They were thinking that if they had been kind back then, they would not have to be punished so severely now. It seemed that it was better to be kind to others. Fortunately, there were kind-hearted lords who treated the Han people well. Now, they did not have to worry about being accused by others. All they had to do was to live their lives well. The series of activities of testifying, arresting, public trial, and sentencing lasted from morning to night. However, it was still not completed. According to Yang Chendong, such a public trial would take another day. This was because there were not many people in Chu-Yi City. If there were more people, it would take 7 days and 7 nights to finish the trial, just like in Hanoi City, the capital of Jiaoji. The public trial would continue tomorrow, and it was necessary to eliminate the unstable elements in the city once and for all. At the same time, it was necessary to build up the confidence of the 2,000 Han people. After all, for a period of time, there were some matters that required their help to complete. However, these were no longer important. Under the suppression of the armed forces, the citizens of Jiaoji in the city could no longer cause any trouble. What Yang Chendong needed to consider was what Jiaoji would do after he conquered Chu-Yi City and how he should deal with it. Fortunately, the communication system was not advanced. Even if something happened in the city, it would not spread immediately. In other words, Yang Chendong and his men still had time to make all the necessary preparations. After summoning the officers under him, Yang Chendong began to make arrangements in an orderly manner. After an hour, the officers walked out of the barracks. Some of them had satisfied smiles on their faces, just like Chen Bo, the commander of the 2nd Battalion of the 2nd Regiment of the Cold Front. There were also some officers who looked dejected. It was obvious that their unit was not the main attacker. If they were not the main attacker, they would not be able to make great contributions. It was no wonder that their expressions were ugly. The one with the ugliest expression was King Lily of Jiaoji, who had just received the news. On the afternoon of the 2nd day after Chu-Yi City was conquered, old Lily, who was in his 60s and taking an afternoon nap with his concubine, was woken up by his subordinates. While he was still looking displeased, as if he would punish his subordinates for disturbing him if it wasn't something important, a piece of news made him turn pale with fright. "Your Majesty, there is news from the rear. Chu-Yi City has been conquered by the mercenaries." Lily, who was not fully awake yet, widened his eyes when he heard this. Then, he acted as if he did not hear it clearly and asked, "What did you say? Say it again." Prime Minister Yuan Chunqing of Jiaoji knew that it was not that the king did not hear it clearly, but that he did not want to believe it. He had no choice but to repeat the incident of Chu-Yi City being conquered. This time, Lily heard it clearly. His brain was working at high speed, and his eyeballs were moving in fear. After a while, he asked, "Have you found out who did it?" "Your Majesty, we have not found out. However, I think it has a lot to do with the mercenaries," Yuan Chunqing guessed. Mercenaries? Weren't they surrounded by Yuan Gengwang and Chen Heijin? Where did they find the troops to attack Chu-Yi City? Lily shook his head as he spoke. Obviously, he did not believe that the mercenaries were so powerful. Therefore, he added, "Could it be the Southern Ming army? After all, they thought that we killed their envoy. It is normal for them to seek revenge." "Absolutely not." At this moment, Yuan Chunqing said confidently. Then, he explained, "Your Majesty, we have arranged our own people in the Southern Ming army. If they do anything, they will not be able to hide it from our eyes. Moreover, the Southern Ming's opponent is the king of Minzhuang. Before this disaster is dealt with, how could they divide their troops to deal with us?" Lily nodded after hearing Yuan Chunqing's words. He knew that he still looked down on the mercenaries. If that was the case, it seemed that only this mysterious army could make a move on them. However, no matter how mysterious he was still a human. Li strode to the map of the palace and stood there for a moment before he gave the order. Order Jishu, Beibei, and Longdian cities to send troops to attack Chu-Yi City from different directions. Try to get rid of the invading mercenaries in the city in the shortest time possible. Also, send someone to contact Chen Heijin and Yuan Gengwang. Tell them that we have discovered the main force of the mercenaries here. Tell them to advance boldly and get rid of the enemy as soon as possible. Lily might be old, but he still had a thorough understanding of the situation in Jiaoji. The series of countermeasures he adopted were also very appropriate. Prime Minister Yuan Chunqing, who was standing below, nodded. If he was the one making the arrangements, this was the most he could do. He immediately complied and walked out of the room. When King Lily was the only one left, his eyes flashed with anger and killing intent. "Mercenaries, since you took the initiative to find trouble with me, then don't go back." Jiaoji was not very big. The advantage of a small country was that things could be spread quickly. As scouts on horses left the city and headed in different directions, a net was formed to deal with the mercenaries. Beibei City. It was located on the east side of Hanoi, the capital of Jiaoji. It could be said that it was the eastern gate of the capital. Since it was the eastern gate, its location was naturally very important. To be able to become the general guarding the city, he naturally had some authority. He was Pan Wenfei of the Pan family, one of the 6 great families of Jiuji. Relying on his family's prestige, Pan Wenfei obtained this position. Because of this matter, who knew how many people had talked about him behind his back? He did not know when it started, but he had secretly made up his mind to perform well. When he achieved great merit, he would use facts to slap the faces of those who dared to slander him behind his back. He would let them know that they were wrong. However, many times having the intention was one thing, and being able to do it was another. If he wanted to achieve great merit, he had to have the opportunity. Previously, when King Lily was persuaded to send troops to the southern Ming Empire, Pan Wenfei had fought to bring troops north. However, how could the Pan family compete with the Ruan family? In the end he failed. After returning to Beibei City, he could only continue to wait. However, although Beibei City was known as the Eastern Gate of Hanoi, the southern Ming Empire was currently weak. It seemed that it was impossible for them to attack Jiuji's territory. He did not know where his opportunity was and if it would appear again. This was especially so when he received news that Ruan Gengwang's army was progressing smoothly and he had already captured 50,000 Han soldiers. This made his heart itch even more, and he cursed Ruan Gengwang countless times in his heart, jealous of his good luck. Fortunately, some time ago, news suddenly came from the front, saying that an army called the Mercenary Army had suddenly appeared and fought with Ruan Gengwang. Ruan Gengwang's nephew, Ruan Yongyang, had died on the battlefield. When he received the news, Pan Wenfei's heart was filled with joy. Although they were officials of the same court, there was still a difference in seniority. If Ruan Gengwang could not do it, would it be his turn? It was also from that time that he began to train the army, preparing to replace Ruan Gengwang and go to the front lines at any time. However, what he did not expect was that before Ruan Gengwang's news came, Chu-Yi City to his east had suddenly changed hands. When this news came out, it gave him a big fright. After sending people to pass the news to Hanoi City, Pan Wenfei began to prepare to send troops. Speaking of which, Chu-Yi City was the closest to him. Now that he had the opportunity to send troops, no one would fight with him. Didn't that mean that it was time for him to display his strength? As long as he eliminated the enemy from the east, he would definitely attract the attention of the king. In the future, it would not be difficult for him to get promoted and become rich. The more he thought about it, the more excited Pan Wenfei became. In a very short time, he began to gather the troops and mobilize the military supplies. He could not wait to perform well. Sure enough, in less than a day, King Li Li's order was passed down, allowing North Belt City to send troops to Chu-Yi City. At the same time, they would take back Chu-Yi City and eliminate the invading enemies. Chapter 480. Who was the enemy? The imperial edict did not state it clearly. However, to Pan Wenfei, none of this was important. What was important was that he could finally lead an army into battle. He had envied his elders for being able to gallop on the battlefield countless times. The moment he received the order, he gathered the 2,000 Jiaoji soldiers who were on standby and left the city. It was not that Pan Wenfei did not want to bring more soldiers out of the city, but he could only mobilize these 2,000 men. With the mentality of going all out in battle, not a single soldier was left in the city. All of them followed him out of the city and headed straight for Chu-Yi City in the east. At the same time when Pan Wenfei left the city, the armies of Jishu and Longyan cities also began to gather rapidly and set off towards Chu-Yi City 6 hours later. The only difference was that they only brought 1,000 soldiers and left half of their soldiers to guard the city. The 3 northern cities moved, and the scouts who had been staring at them quickly reported the information to Chu-Yi City's Yang Chendong. Seeing that the fish had taken the bait, Yang Chendong, who was facing the 3 armies, was not afraid at all. On the contrary, he laughed out loud. Very good, especially the North Belt City General Pan Wenfei's performance. It seems like you are quite accurate in judging people, Hong Jin. Yang Chendong laughed out loud. Hong Jin, who was standing respectfully at the side, lowered his head and replied embarrassedly, I was just lucky to have guessed correctly. It is still the Duke of Loyal and Courageous who gained from strategizing. Previously, Yang Chendong had listened to Hong Jin's analysis of the characters of some of the Jiaoji generals. When he talked about Pan Wenfei, he said that this person was a person who rejoiced in grandiose achievements. He always liked to talk about strategy on paper when he had nothing to do. Because of this, many people had laughed at him. He had never been on the battlefield and thought that he could win the war by manipulating the map. What was the difference between this and deceiving oneself? However, Pan Wenfei only thought that others laughed at him out of jealousy and did not listen to advice at all. As one of the generals, Hong Jin naturally knew about this matter. He reported the matter and proposed that once he learned that Cord City was easily occupied, Pan Wenfei would play his armchair strategist. It was very likely that he would mobilize the entire army and reveal a great flaw. Yang Chendong attached great importance to Hong Jin's words. Furthermore, in his opinion, it was fine even if the information was inaccurate. To be honest, he didn't think much of the 1,200 Jiaoji soldiers. Sending out a cold front battalion or even an auxiliary battalion to deal with them would be a piece of cake. With such confidence, Yang Chendong followed Exin Hongjin's plan and arranged for Battalion Commander Chen Bo of Lungfeng to lie in ambush on the road between Beidao City and Chu-Yi City. He was only waiting for the enemy to come out in full force so that he could seize the opportunity to seize the city. Now, it seemed that this arrangement was very correct. After praising Hong Jin, Yang Chendong turned to the other officers and said, "Since the enemy has made their move, we should also prepare for action. Follow plan number 1 and enter the battlefield." After the officers saluted in unison, they began to get busy with their own tasks. At this moment, King Lily of Jiaoji had no idea what kind of powerful opponent they were facing this time. Even the enemy had started to move. The Jiaoji army that had been peaceful for over 20 years was now in a state of turmoil and war. The distance between Beidao City and Chu-Yi City was only about 180 li. Even if the road was uneven and they had to take a detour, it was only about 200 li. In Pan Wenfei's opinion, this distance could be covered in 3 days. In terms of leg strength, the Ming army was more than twice as fast as the Jiaoji army. Perhaps it was because they had lived in the mountains since young. Many of them had trained their feet to be as sturdy as iron. Even if they were only wearing cloth shoes, their walking speed was still not slow. They could cover about 70 li in a day. In addition, the weather was perfect. It was still drizzling a while ago, but in the past 2 days, the weather had completely cleared up. The weather was so good, the roads were drier, and the army moved faster and faster. All of this created an illusion for Pan Wenfei that this was the will of the heavens, allowing him to reach Chu-Yi City faster and achieve the first military victory. The speed of Bei Feng's army was already very fast. However, compared to the 2 battalions led by Battalion Commander Chen Bo and the 2 auxiliary battalions, it was still much slower. Once there was no battle, the Lung Feng's usual training was 10 kilometers in the morning and 10 kilometers in the morning. If the weather was good in the afternoon, they would even do a 5 kilometers warm-up. Under such high-intensity training, no one could compare to him in terms of speed. To the Lungfeng, it was normal for them to cover a distance of 100 kilometers in a day. If the situation was urgent, they could move even faster. Only by knowing yourself and your enemy can you win 100 battles. They did not understand the mercenaries at all. They did not even dare to confirm whether the ones who took down Chu-Yi City were mercenaries. The fate of the Jiaoji army seemed to have been decided. Needless to say, Beidao City had already been taken down by Yang Chendong. How could their defeat not be decided? Just like now, when the sky darkened, Chen Bo led his 3 battalions of Yang family army to quietly pass by the other side of the mountain range. This kind of irregular movement left Pan Wenfei completely in the dark. He didn't know that his old nest, Beidao City, was about to face the consequence of changing its surname, and he was destined to become a lone army, an army that would never return. In Chu-Yi City, Yang Chendong was having dinner with 2,000 Han people. The trial conference had ended yesterday. Those who had mistreated the Han people in Chu-Yi City in the past, regardless of whether they were soldiers or civilians, had all received their due retribution. This left Chu-Yi City, which originally had a population of 30,000, with only 25,000 people left. A total of 2,000 people were killed and 3,000 were sentenced to death. The entire city was filled with the smell of blood. Even the number of Jiaoji citizens walking on the streets had decreased significantly. Even though the number of people had decreased, the atmosphere in the city had become better. The evil people had all been killed, leaving only the kind-hearted ones. When they met, they would nod their heads to show their friendliness, which lessened the killing intent. In particular, the Yang clan army had never bullied anyone. As long as one abided by the law, even if one bumped into them on the streets, they would not interfere with one another. This made the remaining 20,000 Jiaoji citizens feel much more at ease. In addition, Yang Chendong had ordered the Yang clan army to open up the treasury of Chuyi City and distribute the stored food to the citizens on time. This solved the problem of their food supply, and the atmosphere in the city became much more harmonious. Speaking of which, Jiaoji used to be a subordinate of the Great Ming Dynasty, so the citizens did not have a strong sense of conflict. In addition, Yang Chendong had the intention of running this place well. In just 2 days, the security in the city had improved. Setting himself as an example, Yang Chendong would come to eat with the Han people whenever it was time to eat. Under the influence of the good atmosphere, not only did the Han people feel warm, even some of the more daring citizens of Jiaoji dared to come over and take a look at the young demon king who had killed people without batting an eyelid 2 days ago. Tonight, Yang Chendong came to the square to eat with the Han people again, deepening the relationship between both parties. In fact, since yesterday, there were no more than 2,000 Han people gathered here. Under the busy work of Kong Jie and Song Zhe, the 2 political commissars, the houses of the Jiaoji villains who had been killed were vacated for the Han people to live in and use. This allowed more Han people to be allocated their own houses. It was said that once the situation stabilized, the city gates could be opened to the outside world, and land would be distributed to everyone. This gave all the Han people hope. Since ancient times, land was the foundation of the people. As long as they had land, they could grow food, obtain a good harvest, and live on. It was precisely because Yang Chendong was considerate of them and gave them dignity that the Han people liked this young master. Even though many of them had already been allocated their own houses, when it was time to eat, they would still rush to the square to eat and chat with the young master who brought them hope. Facing these people, Yang Chendong did not put on any airs. Instead, he squatted down and ate with everyone. After eating, he sat cross-legged on the ground and chatted with everyone. As for the content of the chat, there was a variety of topics. Since he did not put on any airs and was so amiable, it allowed him to quickly get closer to the people. Following that, when Yang Chendong talked about some matters and policies, he would receive a positive response from the people. After 2 days of interaction, the Han people also knew that this young master was the Duke of Loyalty and Courage of the Great Ming Dynasty. It seemed that he had a lot to say. After some of the bolder ones finished eating, they asked tentatively, "Duke, you guys have taken down Chu. Presumably, that old fellow Li Li will not accept it. Will they take revenge here?" Just from the way they addressed him, it could be seen how much the Han people living in Jiaoji hated Li Li. Of course, this was also because they had their own dignity after interacting with Yang Chendong and the others for a few days. If it was in the past, they would definitely not dare to say such words. Yes. When this issue was raised, many people's faces changed. It was not easy to have their own dignity and hope for the future. They did not want everything to disappear so quickly. Seeing that everyone was so worried, Yang Chendong smiled. He knew that it was time to reassure everyone. Didn't you all say that Li Li is an old man? Since he is already old, how can he be our opponent? Moreover, it's not like you haven't seen how powerful our army is. Other than the fact that we have fewer people now, our combat power is very strong. Don't worry, unless the enemy doesn't come, no matter how many come, we will destroy them all. When the war starts, if you are interested, you can go up the city tower and see for yourself. Other people might be in danger guarding the city, but we don't have to. Chapter 481. When they heard that they could go up the city gate tower to watch the battle, Some of them became excited. However, when they thought that war was not so fun, they wanted to retreat. However, when they saw Yang Chendong's confident look, they did not feel that afraid anymore. It seemed that they could go up the city gate tower to watch the battle. Looking at the hesitant expressions of these people, Yang Chendong sighed in his heart. The revolution had not succeeded yet. Comrades, you still have to work hard. These Han people had been oppressed for too long. If he wanted them to regain their confidence and become the master of Jiaoji, he would need a lot of time and many things to do. However, since he was here, he had to succeed. Otherwise, if he could not even handle a small Jiaoji, how could he talk about giving the Han people dignity and happiness? How could he talk about conquering the world? Another night passed. The Han people in Chu-Yi City slept very well. They were slowly getting used to this feeling. It was also night time, but some people did not get any rest. They were the reinforcements from the north, Jishu, and Longbian cities. Since the king had given the order, they had to carry it out. In terms of execution, the Jiaoji army was better than the Ming army. Perhaps it was because the Ming army had been split into two. Seeing that it was going to be split into three, the generals had long changed their minds. They were no longer as happy to carry out the orders of their superiors. The speed of the Jiaoji army was not slow, especially in the middle. They had the most soldiers and the highest morale. Under the leadership of General Pan Wenfei, they wanted to achieve the greatest merit. They were the first to set off and were now less than 10 li away from Chu-Yi City. Seeing that the target was right in front of him, Pan Wenfei had a bold idea in his heart. Could he take advantage of the night to attack? If that was the case, he would be able to take down Chu-Yi City before the other reinforcements arrived. That would be the greatest merit. Once this idea appeared in his mind, he could not get rid of it. Pan Wenfei, who was stimulated by the military merit, quickly made a decision. He then ordered the army to start resting. Everyone eat first and rest well. After 4 hours, we will begin the siege. At that time, all the credit will belong to us brothers. As Pan Wenfei rode his horse through the army, he explained his plan. The 2,000 Jiaoji soldiers were extremely excited. They didn't know how powerful Yang Xie's new army was. They had been staying in Beidai City for a long time, and they thought that they were the strongest soldiers in the world. Under such a mindset, one really dared to think of anything and do anything. However, one never considered whether one had such a big appetite and could do such an important thing. The scouts who had been keeping an eye on the soldiers in the north suddenly realized that they had stopped moving. They were still 10 li away from Chu-Yi City. Logically speaking, this shouldn't be the case. If it were them, they would at least stop at a distance of 5 miles from the city gate to rest and reorganize. This way, they would be able to achieve twice the result with half the effort when attacking the city tomorrow morning. Realizing that something was amiss, the scout squad leader sent a soldier back to the city to report. They couldn't tell what these people were up to, but the 6th young master should be able to tell. In their hearts, they had already deified the 6th young master and thought that he was a god sent down by the heavens. Otherwise, how could they explain the powerful firearms in their hands? They stopped 10 li away and haven't set up camp? In Chu-Yi City, Yang Chendong's expression revealed a look of understanding after hearing the scout's report. After all, he had attended a military academy in the future and had studied countless battles since ancient times. He was already familiar with some of the tactics of his predecessors. Compared to the various three-dimensional battle tactics of the future, the battles of ancient times were sometimes like child's play. How could Pan Wenfei's little plan escape his eyes? They want to copy us and launch a night attack. Very good, since that's the case, don't let them go back. A mature battle plan flashed through Yang Chendong's mind. Originally, Yang Chendong didn't have the idea of swallowing Pan Wenfei's troops, but he did have the intention of severely injuring them. Compared to other people who were afraid that their strength would be exposed in front of others, Yang Chendong did the opposite. He hoped that others would know how powerful he was so that when they fought, it would be twice the result with half the effort. Before they met the enemy, they would already have a 30% advantage in terms of momentum. With this thought, Yang Chendong needed someone to spread the news of the bravery of the Yang family army. Originally, This candidate was Pan Wenfei. It was very simple to achieve this goal. He only needed to severely injure the opponent. The opponent who was scared out of his wits would surely spread the news for him. However, he didn't expect that Pan Wenfei would actually think of launching a night attack. This attitude of not putting the Yang family army in his eyes made Yang Chendong angry, but he also decided to take him down. Since he didn't even have the ability to see this, there was no need for such a general to continue living. As for the matter of spreading the news, it was very simple. Didn't Jishu and Longbian City have a total of 2,000 troops? He just needed to let them spread the news for him. Gather Commander Luo Pe and all the officers above battalion level in the city for an emergency meeting. Yang Chendong, who had a plan in mind, said to Tiger's Mane, who was standing at the side waiting for orders. Outside Chu-Yi City. After more than 4 hours of rest, the 2,000 soldiers from the north were in much better spirits. After eating and drinking to their heart's content, under the leadership of General Pan Wenfei, they groped their way towards Chu-Yi City, which was 10 miles away. Earlier, Pan Wenfei had already mobilized the troops before the battle. He made a promise to the 2 Kiliarchs and the 2 centurions under him. He said that once they were able to take down the city, money, women, and power would satisfy them to the greatest extent. With the general's promise, the morale of the troops was raised. Some of the young generals who were willing to think in the best possible way seemed to have already seen the scene of gold and silver placed in front of them. With such a vision and hope for a beautiful future, the 2,000 soldiers used a speed that was at least a quarter of their usual speed to arrive at a place 2 miles away from Chu-Yi City. Looking up at the top of Chu-Yi City from this position, they could already see the figures of soldiers moving around under the lit torches. Everything is normal. Seeing that there was nothing out of the ordinary, and even the number of guards on the top of the city tower was not many. Thinking about it, there must have been some lazy people who went to rest late at night. And this was the reason why Pan Wenfei wanted to launch a surprise attack in the middle of the night. As long as he grasped the right opportunity, he might be able to launch an attack. Listening to the scout leader beside him reporting the situation in Chu-Yi City, Pan Wenfei, who was officially leading troops into battle for the first time, had a face full of excitement and agitation. Okay. If there are no problems, immediately arrange for the siege. The cities in Jiaoji were not very tall. Perhaps it was because very few people came to invade, or perhaps it was because the resources were too scarce, there were not many things that could be used. In addition, there was not much historical evidence, so the city walls of their cities were more symbolic than defensive. For example, the city walls of Chu-Yi City were only 2 zhang tall. It was more than 6 meters high, and it was possible to climb up with a rope. The siege that Pan Wenfei mentioned was the method of using ropes to forcefully climb the city walls. And as long as a large group of people and horses climbed up the city tower and opened the city gates from the inside, they could suddenly enter the city and deal a fatal blow to the enemy. The scales of victory would naturally tilt towards the Jiaoji army. After the main general gave the order, a group of 100 people immediately moved forward under the cover of the night. These were the warriors that were carefully selected from the 2,000 people. They were more agile than ordinary soldiers. Once these people climbed up the city tower, it was basically a done deal for them to take down the city. After the elite group of 100 people set off, Pan Wenfei and the rest did not stay idle. The remaining 1,900 people quickly approached the bottom of Chu-Yi City Tower. They were making their final preparations. Once the city gates opened from the inside, they would immediately kill their way into the city and display their bravery and grace. For a moment, Chu-Yi City, which was originally shrouded in darkness, had black shadows moving continuously on top and bottom of the city walls. It was as though a large army was pressing down on the city. Creak! Just as the soldiers climbing the city tower and Beifeng's troops were moving towards their target, the originally tightly shut west city gate suddenly opened from the inside. The sound of the heavy city gate opening was extremely shocking in the dark night. What's going on? The sudden change caused Beifeng's troops to stop in their tracks. The soldiers looked at the Dekarches looked at the centurions, The centurions looked at the Kiliarchs, and the Kiliarchs' gaze naturally landed on the dumbfounded General Pan Wenfei. At this moment, Pan Wenfei was also at a loss. He did not understand why the city tower opened on its own so quickly. Because of this, he said without any principles, is it because the enemy knows that we are here and knows that they can't defeat us, so they are opening the city gates and surrendering? Even the stupidest person would not believe this sentence. They did not know whether to laugh or cry at General Pan Wenfei's overly good self-suggestion. Charge! Just as the general and the soldiers' faces were sluggish, the sound of footsteps suddenly came from the originally pitch-black gate. After that, countless figures leaped out of the city gate like fish. There were countless of them. At this moment, there was no need for Pan Wenfei to say anything. Everyone understood what was going on. This was not because the enemy was afraid of them and had surrendered. They were already prepared and were about to charge out. Pan Wenfei, who was leading troops for the first time, was indeed shocked by the scene in front of him. In the past, when he was an armchair strategist, the things he did and his predictions were all wishful thinking. For example, in his imagination, when two armies were fighting, they would listen to him. Whoever he wanted to win would win. How could there be such an unexpected event like this happening before his eyes? Chapter 482. Things didn't develop as he expected and Pan Wenfei lacked flexibility. His brain wasn't working properly and he could only rely on a Chiliarch beside him to remind him. General, the enemy is prepared. Should we kill or retreat? Quickly make a decision. We can't retreat. With this reminder, Pan Wenfei came back to his senses and said decisively. The morale that he had gathered with great difficulty would crumble in an instant if he retreated. Then, the army would be defeated like a landslide. Although he might be able to leave safely under heavy protection, this was not what he wanted to see. Since he was already here, Pan Wenfei naturally wanted to show off his achievements by showing up here in such an active manner. With the idea of the brave winning when two armies met, Pan Wenfei, who was still a man, pulled out the saber at his waist and pointed it forward as he shouted the word, charge. Despite Pan Wenfei's bravery, his performance was still not enough in front of the mercenaries who were already prepared for this. When he shouted the word, charge, there were only a few torches on Chu Yi's city gate tower, but suddenly there were many more torches. It was as if a fire dragon had suddenly appeared and lit up the entire city gate tower. The sudden appearance of the densely packed torches and an endless crowd of people was quite a shocking sight to behold. The appearance of the torches also shocked the elite warriors who were trying their best to climb up the city gate tower. Some of the weaker ones naturally fell from their waists. In fact, other than a row of Lung Feng, the rest of the people who appeared on the city gate tower were all ordinary citizens of Chu Yi City. They were summoned by Yang Chundong to watch the battle in the middle of the night. Using the words of the sixth young master, if these people wanted to live here in the future, they must have confidence in the mercenaries. Watching the battle and witnessing the powerful military strength of the mercenaries was like a shot in the arm, allowing them to quickly change. However, under the darkness, how could the soldiers in the north know this? When they saw the black figures on the city gate tower, they instinctively thought that it was the enemy. When they saw that there were so many of them, they naturally became timid. It was also at this time that Lung Feng, the auxiliary soldiers, and the temporary auxiliary soldiers rushed out of the city gates and arrived. Under the unified and deafening roar of kill, the 95 style and 88 assault rifles fired in unison. In just a single exchange, many Beiju soldiers lost their lives. There were only 2,000 soldiers in the Northern Army, and before they could even meet the enemy, 1/7 of them had already died. This kind of fighting spirit could be imagined. Some of the Northern Army soldiers who were responding to General Pan Wenfei's order to charge could not help but stop moving forward. Then, cold sweat broke out on their foreheads and their faces turned ashen. Temporary auxiliary soldiers, it's time for us to perform meritorious deeds. Charge. A few temporary auxiliary battalion commanders saw that the opportunity had arrived. Without any explanation, they shouted loudly and ran forward with their crossbows in hand. They were prepared to fire the moment they got close enough. The saying of an army pressing on the border described the current situation of the temporary auxiliary soldiers. They had already been caught off guard, and many of their soldiers had died before they even met the enemy. At this moment, the soldiers of the north were already terrified. Coupled with the sudden attack of the temporary auxiliary soldiers, at this moment, their morale, commitment, and courage had all disappeared. The only thing they could do was to instinctively turn around and run. However, it would take time for the charging army to suddenly turn around and run. This was the hope of the temporary auxiliary soldiers. They only had crossbows in their hands and did not have the advantage of long-range combat like Lung Feng and the auxiliary soldiers. If they wanted to perform meritorious deeds, if they wanted to join the auxiliary soldiers, they needed to have enough military merits. How to perform meritorious deeds on the battlefield was undoubtedly the best shortcut to becoming a glorious auxiliary soldier. Without effort, there would be no reward. Seeing that the opportunity was right in front of them, a total of 14 battalions of auxiliary soldiers, a total of 5,000 people, ran forward with all their might. There were less than 2,000 enemies. If anyone was a step slower, they would not be able to perform any meritorious deeds. Under such pressure, who would not give their all? The temporary auxiliary soldiers charged forward. Once they got close, the crossbow bolts rained down like rain. Under such a powerful attack, not to mention 2,000 Northern Army soldiers, even 10,000 Jiaoji soldiers would not be able to do anything. Furthermore, they were already scared out of their wits. They definitely could not win the battle. It all depended on who was faster and who was lucky enough to escape. More than 1,000 Northland soldiers had charged forward, stopped, and turned around to flee. Their weapons and armor were scattered all over the ground as they ran. They hated the fact that they were carrying too much and too heavy. Anything that could lighten their load was thrown away. The soldiers turned around and ran. In the face of death, they unleashed their potential. The centurions, Kiliarchs, and even General Pan Wenfei, who were usually lax in training, were the unlucky ones. Without anyone to protect them, they became the last to run. They also became the first targets of the temporary auxiliary soldiers. The crossbow bolts did not have eyes. In order to perform meritorious deeds, the temporary auxiliary soldiers did not care if they were facing ordinary soldiers or high and mighty generals. They only knew one thing, and that was to kill. If they killed someone, they could take the head and claim the credit. With meritorious deeds, they would have the opportunity to become an auxiliary soldier. If they could even become a cold vanguard, that would be even better. The temporary auxiliary soldiers were eager to perform meritorious deeds. Arrows rained down like rain. Poor General Pan Wenfei, who couldn't run anymore, turned around and held his sword, ready to fight. But soon, his pupils began to dilate, and he fell to the ground like a hedgehog. Until the moment he was shot to death, he still could not understand. He still could not face the moment before his eyes. After all, everything happened too quickly. It was so fast that it was easy to think that it was a dream. Pan Wenfei died, followed by the Kiliarchs and centurions. Then, a large number of Northern Army soldiers were caught and shot to death. Only a few of them reacted quickly. They squatted on the ground and shouted to surrender. Only then did they avoid death. A total of 2,000 Northern Army soldiers. In less than 2 hours, the battle was completely over. After counting, not a single one of the 2,000 soldiers managed to escape. This showed how much the temporary auxiliary soldiers wanted to perform meritorious deeds. From the mouths of the captured soldiers, they found Pan Wenfei, whose body was full of crossbow bolts. When Hong Jin saw this scene, he was so frightened that he sucked in a breath of cold air. After witnessing the power of the mercenaries once again, he finally understood why he lost so miserably. Compared to the powerful Jiaoji army in the eyes of others, the Jiaoji army was nothing but a man-eating wolf. In front of the mercenary tiger army, the Jiaoji army was nothing. Pan Wenfei was eager to perform meritorious deeds and had already revealed too many flaws. Even if the two armies were to fight head-on, there would be no chance of victory. In front of the mercenaries who had strong morale, strong fighting spirit, advanced weapons, strict military discipline, and elite qualities, There was no army in the world that could be their opponent. There were probably very few who were qualified to be their opponent. Not only Hong Jin, but the civilians on the city gate tower were also completely shocked when they saw this scene. Although most of them had not experienced war, this term was only what they imagined it to be. However, they had heard from the older generation that war was either a matter of life and death. As the saying went, a general's success was built on the bones of thousands. Victory had always been hard to come by. It required the blood and bones of countless people to accumulate. How could it be as simple as what they saw? One group of people kept charging and the other group kept retreating. How could it be as simple as what they saw? One group of people kept charging and the other group kept retreating. The Han civilians of Jiaoji witnessed the heroic performance of the mercenaries on the battlefield. While they were sighing at how easy it was to win, their hearts were filled with boundless admiration and respect for this army. None of the 2,000 enemies managed to escape. None of the auxiliary soldiers who charged out were killed. Only a few of them suffered from varying degrees of injuries. This kind of result that could be considered as a complete victory shocked the 2,000 Han civilians of Chu-Yi City. It filled them with confidence for their beautiful future. At the same time, some of the Jiaoji citizens who originally had other thoughts also began to give up at this moment, putting away all of their negative thoughts. Hurry up and clean up the battlefield. Set up the Jingguan. Seize the time to rest. There are still enemies coming at dawn. The shouts of the officers rang out continuously below the city gate. Then, groups of mercenaries shuttled back and forth busily. The Jingguan was an ancient burial mound used to flaunt one's martial arts and gather the corpses of the enemies. The reason why Yang Chendong wanted to set up the Jingguan was naturally because he wanted to create a better deterrent effect. If possible, he did not want to target the ordinary Jiaoji civilians and soldiers. What he wanted was the lives of the few people who held the highest positions. He wanted the lives of the foreign races who were hostile to the Han people. If he wanted to rule over this place, he would need the support of a large population. If he killed all of them, this place would become a piece of scorched earth. This was not the result he wanted to see. The night passed in such a bustling manner. The next morning, a Jingguan with close to 2,000 men was set up and placed 5 li away from the west gate of Chu-Yi City. The reinforcements from Jishu and Longbian arrived at this place after daybreak. This was what they saw. The tall Jingguans suddenly appeared in their field of vision, causing the 2,000 Jiaoji soldiers to stop in their tracks. When the scouts they sent out reported that the corpse of General Pan Wenfei was hanging on the city gate tower of Chu-Yi City, they finally knew the origin of this Jingguan. Chapter 483. Based on the information they received, Pan Wenfei's troops from the north had only arrived 10 hours earlier than them. How could they have been wiped out in such a short period of time? If that was the case, what kind of terrifying enemy were they facing? While the 2 reinforcements were analyzing the situation, the 6 auxiliary battalions left the city after a good night's sleep. After yesterday's victory, Yang Chendong intended to increase the combat strength of the auxiliary soldiers. This time, he did not send out the most elite Lung Feng. However, even with 3 auxiliary battalions in each direction, there were only a little more than 1,000 men. They were far from a match for the 2 Jiaoji reinforcements. When the 3 auxiliary battalions suddenly appeared in each direction, the 2,000 reinforcements sent by Jishu City and Longbian City resisted for a while. When they discovered that the advanced firearms in the auxiliary battalion's hands could cause a large area of long-range damage to them without waiting for them to engage the enemy, they finally understood the strength of their opponents when they saw the soldiers in the front line falling to the ground one by one with the sound of gunfire. With such powerful firearms that could take their lives from 300 to 400 meters away, such an opponent was truly terrifying. Run! Without any exciting close combat, the 2,000 Jiaoji reinforcements turned around and fled. Along the way, they left behind about 700 corpses. This was because they escaped quickly enough. If they really fought to the death, these 2,000 men would face the danger of being completely wiped out. The scale of the Jingguan became even larger. Although the Jingguan seemed extremely terrifying, the citizens of Chu-Yi City felt exceptionally peaceful. With the protection of such a powerful army, they could finally put aside their worries about the Jiaoji army's revenge. Although the 2 consecutive battles were not intense, the results were gratifying. After the 2 battles, Yang Chendong made the decision to go deeper into the inner region of Jiaoji. In order to protect the citizens of Chu-Yi City that had already been conquered and to better consolidate the hearts of the people, the political commissar of the auxiliary battalion, Song Zhe, was left behind. The mission Yang Chendong gave him was to persuade the Han and Jiaoji citizens as quickly as possible. The day Jiaoji was conquered would be the day they would be put to use. At the same time, 2 auxiliary battalions and 2 temporary auxiliary battalions were left behind. With this military strength, it would be enough to defend the city even if the enemy was several times stronger. After arranging everything in the city, Yang Chendong brought the 3rd Battalion of the 2nd Regiment, the 6 battalions of the Auxiliary Army, and the 14 battalions of the Auxiliary Army, a total of over 7,000 people, and headed towards Beidai City in the direction that Pan Wenfei had come from. At this moment, Chu-Yi City, which was facing Chu-Yi City, had already changed hands. When Battalion Commander Qin Bo of the Cold Front brought the 2nd Battalion and 2 auxiliary battalions to Chu-Yi City, which was still open, the unguarded Chu-Yi City was swallowed up in an instant. Of the 40,000 citizens in the city, less than 2,000 managed to escape. The remaining 38,000 people, including the 3,000 Han, were all locked up in the city. Chen Bo's appearance was like a heavenly soldier descending from the heavens, causing the commoners in the city to close their doors. Everyone's expression changed. The originally bustling city instantly became much emptier, as if it was a dead city, cold and cheerless. Chen Bo did not choose to search every house like he did in Chu-Yi City. Instead, he first sent a battalion of auxiliary soldiers to occupy the city towers and a company of soldiers to guard every gate. Then he sent men to seal the treasury of Chu-Yi City, obtaining large amounts of food and a small amount of gold and silver. With sufficient food, Qin Bo ordered the remaining battalion of auxiliary soldiers to patrol the streets, maintaining the security of the city. The remaining Cold Front battalion became a mobile force, preventing any large-scale mutiny from occurring in the city. This was something that could not be helped. He only had 12 companies of 1,200 men, and to maintain the security of a city of 40,000 people, coupled with the fact that he was a newcomer, he had to be wary of any enemies that might appear at any time. His military strength was truly lacking. If not for the fact that he knew that the 6th young master would be arriving soon, he would have already thought of leaving after robbing the treasury. The 2,000 citizens of Jiaoji who had escaped quickly spread the news of the fall of Chu-Yi City. 200 li behind them was the capital of Jiaoji, Haniai City. When the news reached there, it caused chaos in the city. If not for the protection of the 30,000 Jiaoji soldiers stationed here, no one knew what would have happened. Jiaoji Palace. King Lili also received the news. His face was filled with disbelief, but at the same time, he was confused. It wasn't just King Lili who couldn't figure it out. Even the officials who had been urgently summoned couldn't figure it out. How could Beidao City change hands without any warning? Why was there not even a basic warning or resistance? What was the defending general, Pan Wenfei, doing? Fortunately, Prime Minister Yuan Chunqing, who arrived at the end, gave an answer. He said that Pan Wenfei was eager to gain merit, and took all the soldiers in Chu-Yi City to attack. At this time, the news of the Chu-Yi City being placed in the capital had not yet spread. Naturally, no one knew whether Pan Wenfei was dead or alive. However, losing Beidai City was a fact. Just based on this, King Lili, who was sitting high above, vented his anger and said, "Pan Wenfei is an idiot. He only knows how to attack and not defend. He is an idiot. Once the war is over, demote him to the rank of Chiliarch." Old Lili, who was in his 60s, demoted Pan Wenfei before hearing the results of Chu-Yi City. If General Pan Wenfei knew about this, who knew how he would feel? However, since Chu-Yi City had changed hands, there was no point in punishing Pan Wenfei. What they needed to do now was to take back Chu-Yi City. Otherwise, it would become an existence that could threaten Hanoi City at any time. Who is willing to lead troops to solve the problem of Chu-E City? His gaze that was like that of a tiger king scanned the hall of the palace, especially the few generals. Li Li asked in a low voice. I am willing. Just as he finished speaking, a 7-foot-tall middle-aged man stood out. This person's gaze was like a pillar. Just standing there, he naturally gave off an intimidating aura. He was the famous general of Jiaoji, Fan Yuhai. Fan Yuhai was the 4th largest surname in Jiaoji and had a lot of influence in the country. The main reason why he could be called a famous general was because of the conflicts between Jiaoji and the Lan Tsang Kingdom, which was today's Laos. He played a big role in it. He led troops to fight against the Lan Tsang army 3 times and won all 3 times. That was why he was called a famous general. Fan Yuhai being able to take the initiative to stand up made King Li Li very happy. However, he didn't agree to such a request. In his opinion, the enemy was unknown, and they didn't even know their numbers. The only thing they knew was that they were mercenaries. Under such circumstances, if they sent out a famous general and lost, the morale of the entire country's army would be greatly shaken. Not agreeing to Fan Yuhai's request, Li Li's gaze landed on another general called Huang Hua. In comparison, this person was shorter. However, he had led troops to fight against the Lan Tsang army. Although he did not have any outstanding achievements, he had been on the battlefield and seen blood. General Huang Hua, this king orders you to lead 5,000 troops to Beidao City. Are you willing to accept the order? Although it was a question, anyone could tell that if Huang Hua dared to disagree, he would not have a good time. This subject is willing to accept the order. How could Huang Hua not see the king's intention? Although he himself was not willing to accept this task, since he was named, he already had no other choice. Very good. You can lead the troops with peace of mind. According to the reports, the number of mercenaries is less than 10,000. The Liangshan region should be their main force. You shouldn't have to face many enemies. Li Li comforted Huang Hua. After speaking, he looked at Prime Minister Ruan Chunqing and said, send someone to tell Chen Heijin and General Ruan Gingwang to end the battle quickly and show the might of Jiaoji's army. This subject understands. Ruan Chunqing bowed. He could tell that the king was unhappy. He decided to immediately send someone to find Ruan Gingwang and tell him to perform well. Otherwise, the Ruan family would not be able to get any benefits. In the vast and boundless Lang Mountain, the scene of a chaotic pursuit was playing out. Ruan Gingwang led 30,000 troops, and Chen Heijin also led 30,000 troops. They were only facing Wu Sheng's Cold Front Battalion and 2 auxiliary battalions, totaling 1,200 people. 60,000 against 1,200, with a ratio of 50-1, the result seemed to be set in stone. However, the truth was the opposite. In the 10 days of pursuit, the Jiaoji army, which had the advantage in numbers, suffered heavy losses. The Cold Front Battalion had gone through special training in the rainforest. When they separated from Yang Chendong's main force, they had obtained a large amount of ammunition. Especially the number of landmines, each of them had 10 of them. In addition, Wu Sheng, as the leader, had given his subordinates the authority to attack in groups. Each group would be split into 2 groups. The squad leader and assistant squad leader would each lead a group. This meant that there were 240 units. Just think about it. In the process of pursuit, they had to face the attacks of 200 units at any time. No one would be able to stand it. It was just like in the rainforest. No one knew when there would be a loud explosion. Needless to say, this was caused by the Jiaoji soldiers behind them stepping on a landmine. If one could not understand the secret signal between the Cold Front Battalion, they would not know where the landmines were. In the rainforest, the terrain was steep and complicated. Everywhere could be a good place to set up a landmine. In addition, the scattered Cold Front Battalion would occasionally launch a sneak attack. It was easy to imagine the situation of the Jiaoji army. Chapter 484. In front of a low-lying ditch, there were 5 Lungfeng brothers lying in ambush around it. The trench was naturally formed. After years of being watered by the rain, soil erosion was severe, causing the water in the trench to be knee-deep. An invisible landmine was buried under the trench. The reason why the landmine was buried here was because the area was surrounded by large trees. In comparison, only this low-lying area was suitable for humans to walk through. During their training in the rainforest some time ago, Yang Chendong had mentioned that such a place was often the only way for humans to travel. The 5 Lung Feng brothers surrounded the trench. There was one person on each of the 2 large trees on the left and right. They looked down from above. Not only could they kill the enemy from above, they could also act as sentries. 2 Lung Feng warriors were also hiding in the bushes on the left and right of the trench. They were in charge of catching the fish that might have fallen into the net after passing through the trench. The last person was the leader, the squad leader of the 5. He was in charge of maneuvering. He was in charge of luring the enemy and retreating. Do not underestimate the task of luring the enemy. He could only lure a large number of enemies if he did it well. On the other hand, no matter how good the trap was, it would only be a beautiful decoration if no one fell for it. Squad leader, there are enemies 200 meters to the southeast. Squad leader Lung Feng, who was leaning against a large tree and chewing on a fresh leaf, heard his comrades shout. 15 minutes ago, this squad leader had lured a Jiaoji corporal out. In less than the time it took to drink a cup of tea, he killed all 5 enemies near the puddle. Then, he dragged the bodies of the dead enemies to the bushes to hide them. After doing all this, the squad leader wanted to rest and recover his strength, but he heard his comrades' warning. The enemy was in order. The squad leader, who was resting with his eyes closed, suddenly opened his eyes. Like a venomous snake that had spotted its prey, he arched his body and shot out. Naturally, the direction was southeast. He wanted to lure the enemy over and eliminate them without leaving a trace. With Lung Feng's spear skills, even in an open battle, the Jiaoji army would not be a match for him. However, in this dense forest, there were no logistical supplies. The ammunition that the soldiers brought with them was depleted. In order to complete the glorious mission that the 6th young master had entrusted to them, they needed to conserve their strength as much as possible. In that case, how to lure the enemy in front of them and hunt them down would become a test of their abilities. The squad leader shot out like a catapult. In just a few breaths, he appeared in the southeast direction. Since he had no intention of hiding himself, he was seen clearly by a squad leader of the Jiaoji army not far away. There's an enemy over there. Follow me quick. He had been in the rainforest for a long time. From time to time, he could hear explosions and gunshots in the distance, but he had never seen an enemy. This inevitably made Shin Chang feel like he was dealing with ghosts. Now that he finally saw a living opponent, how could he let him go? After a loud shout, the 9 soldiers behind him followed him and chased in the direction where Lung Feng had disappeared. On top of the 2 giant trees, the 2 Lung Feng soldiers who had seen the movements of the Jiaoji army made a hand signal to their comrades below the trees. After informing them that there were 10 enemies, they raised their 95 style and stared at the 2 people in front and behind the enemy. It was impossible to keep an eye on 10 people with 2 guns. However, as long as they kept an eye on the head and the tail, the enemy would not be able to escape. This was common knowledge that they had to master during their training. Due to the appearance of Yang Chendong, the experience gained by countless predecessors in the future had become knowledge that was stored in the minds of the Lung Feng soldiers. The squad leader, who had no idea that he was being targeted, was so excited that he wanted to catch his opponent. He yelled as he led his 9 brothers to chase after squad leader Lung Feng. Under Lung Feng's intentional bait, the distance between the 2 parties was maintained within 50 meters. At such a distance, the enemy would not lose sight of them and would not be able to hurt them with arrows. One had to know that in this environment where there were tall trees and bushes everywhere, sometimes even a bullet would miss, let alone an ordinary bow. As expected, after shooting a few arrows consecutively without hitting the target, the squad leader decisively ordered the soldiers to stop shooting and focus on their legs. They had to speed up and catch up with the enemy who appeared and disappeared like a ghost. As one of the black soldiers under General Chen Jinhe, the 10 of them were considered the cream of the crop in the Jiaoji army. Just like in the rainforest, They were able to run as fast as they could. It was not much different from running on the open ground. Elites naturally had the confidence of elites. It was because of this confidence that they did not give up on chasing after the enemy even though they knew that something was wrong. This was how the truly powerful were. They were not afraid of any schemes and machinations with their valiant strength. The enemy's speed was very fast. Lung Feng, who was leading the way, had no choice but to use all his strength to leave them behind. When he arrived at the puddle, he jumped over the puddle and ran to the other side to hide. Just as Lung Feng's figure disappeared, the black soldiers caught up with him. The squad leader who was running at the front leaped into the air without hesitation when he saw the puddle in front of him. He followed squad leader Lung Feng's example and leaped over the puddle before continuing to run forward. After the 10-man squad leader leaped into the air, the other 2 black soldiers also leaped into the air and leaped over the 2.5-meter-tall puddle. The Cold Blade warriors who were hiding on top of the tree saw all of this and could not help but feel a little anxious. If these black soldiers could really jump over the puddle, wouldn't it mean that the ambush in the puddle would be useless? Thinking of this, one of the Cold Vanguard soldiers lowered the muzzle of his gun. He was ready to fire. Although the hit rate of this kind of high-speed enemy was a little low, and it was easy to expose his position, he couldn't care less at this time. Just as the Lung Feng soldiers were about to fire to see if they could hit the black soldiers and trigger the landmine in the puddle, another black soldier jumped up. However, perhaps because he had used up too much of his stamina, his leap was short and his left foot landed in the puddle. It was this unintentional carelessness that brought about a fatal result. A column of water suddenly rushed out from the puddle, followed by a deafening roar. The landmines in the puddles were triggered, and the powerful explosive force of the gunpowder directly sent the 4 black soldiers who were closest to the puddles flying. The powerful explosion caused the black soldiers to involuntarily pause. At this moment, 4 gunshots rang out. The 5 soldiers, including Captain Lung Feng, each fired a shot, and all of them hit their targets. 4 of them were killed in the explosion and 5 were shot dead. In a short period of time, the squad leader was the only one left out of the 10 black soldiers. This squad leader was also impressive. He did not have the slightest intention of running away when he saw that all his brothers were dead. On the contrary, he noticed that the squad leader had exposed his identity by firing a shot. Then he pounced on him like a ferocious tiger. After killing a black soldier, the squad leader did not have time to turn his gun around when he sensed a black shadow approaching him quickly. Instinctively, the Lung Feng soldier rolled to the side. Thanks to this roll, the long saber that was descending from the sky missed its mark and left a deep saber mark on the ground. The squad leader quickly rolled away after missing his shot. He rushed toward the squad leader, Lung Feng, who was still standing up. The long saber in his hand was like a blender. It seemed like he wanted to perish together with the squad leader. The squad leader, Lung Feng, had just stood up from the ground. His body was unstable and the muzzle of his gun was not fully adjusted. His instincts told him that he might not be able to hit the target if he fired the shot. He might even be injured by the opponent's long saber if he wasted time. Helplessly, he could only continue to lean back and roll backward. The squad leader's reaction was somewhat out of the squad leader's expectation. After knowing that his opponent was strong, he felt the existence of danger. Since his first and second shots did not hit the target, he wanted to find a place to hide. What happened just now told him that his opponent had reinforcements nearby and he was fighting alone. The thought of hiding flashed across his mind. Just as the squad leader was about to dive into the bushes at the side, a gunshot was heard. The squad leader's body swayed a little before he fell to the ground with a plop. Some water droplets splashed when his body hit the ground. The shot was fired by a squad leader who was hiding in a giant tree. He felt that his opponent was trying to escape, so he fired without hesitation. He did not have much confidence at first, but now it seemed that he was lucky. After the gunshot, Lung Feng adjusted his posture and dashed over. The dagger in his hand flashed and plunged into the chest of the black squad leader who had fallen to the ground. Finishing off the enemy was one of the compulsory courses for the squad leaders. When Yang Chendong was training for this course, He once said that they should never take any chances and should not be too confident in themselves. Since ancient times, countless talented people had died because they underestimated their opponents. Therefore, regardless of whether the opponent was really dead or not, they should give the finishing blow if they could. If they couldn't, they should give the finishing blow. They should never let the enemy go just because they wanted to save energy. Otherwise, it would be the greatest crime and irresponsibility to their comrades. Chapter 485. After the last stab, the black soldier's body trembled again. It was a normal reaction before death. After sensing that the target was dead, Lung Feng gave a thumbs up to the Lung Feng on the tree, praising the beauty and brilliance of the shot. Then he turned to the other 4 comrades and said, "Clean up the battlefield and prepare to retreat to the next ambush location. Also, leave a landmine under the enemy's corpse. Also, leave a mark to alert other comrades who might be passing by." Following Captain Lung Feng's words, except for one warrior on the tree who was responsible for keeping watch, the other 3 came to the ground and began to clean up. After 15 minutes, the battlefield was cleaned up and the landmines were planted. Then, the 5 of them left quietly to complete the next ambush mission. Scenes like this were happening all the time in the dense forests of Langsun. More than 200 small teams were constantly completing missions like this. And once they killed a group of enemies, it would be time for them to reap a harvest. For example, the rations that the enemy had on them would become their supplies. It was true that if there was no food or water, the enemy would give them to us. With more than 200 squads, even if each squad only killed 10 people a day, the Jiaoji army would lose 2,000 men, not to mention that some squads could kill 3 or even 4 squads a day. In just 5 days, the Jiaoji army had already lost more than 15,000 men. There would always be small groups that would mysteriously lose contact with them. When this news reached the ears of General Ruan Gingwang and Chen Heijin, it made them very frustrated. Even worse, the king had given an order. He mentioned that Chu-Yi City and Beidai City had both fallen. Based on the situation there, the king believed that there would not be many mercenaries in Langsun. He requested them to quickly end the battle here and return to Hanoi City to reinforce it. "How can we possibly return to reinforce it?" The tanned Chen Heijin slammed his palm on the wooden table in the temporary camp. His originally tanned face looked even scarier due to his anger. It was no wonder that Chen Heijin was so angry. Ever since he started leading the army, he had never fought a battle like this. They couldn't even see where the enemy was. At least 5,000 of their soldiers had died. This feeling of not being able to touch or hit the enemy was the most infuriating. Chen Heijin neither objected nor agreed with the king's order that there would not be too many enemies. However, he supported the idea of returning to Hanoi City to reinforce the city. As the saying goes, when an expert shows his hand, one will know whether or not he is an expert. Regardless of the number of enemies in the rainforest, at least their combat power was astonishing. From the start of the battle until now, his subordinates did not even bring back a single enemy's corpse. Just based on this, he did not dare to be the slightest bit careless. How could he dare to attack crazily? Pass down the order. Pull back the troops and move towards Hanoi City, Chen Heijin said to his deputy with a serious face. "General, the king wants us to finish off our opponents quickly before returning to reinforce them." The deputy general beside him thought that he had misheard the military order and reminded him softly. Of course this general knows. But in such an environment, how can we find our opponents and fight them? It's better to retreat immediately and find a spacious place. When that time comes, these people will have to come out. Chen Heijin looked forward with a deep gaze. He had always thought that his black soldiers were the kings of the rainforest. However, after encountering an opponent stronger than himself, he realized how useless it would be to continue fighting like this. Instead of being constantly weakened, it was better to withdraw from here and look for another opportunity. Oh right, inform all the soldiers to not be too anxious when retreating. All the troops must be close to each other to prevent giving the enemy any chance to attack. Chen Heijin did not dare to underestimate the enemy in front of him. Even when retreating, he was still cautious. Unlike Chen Heijin, Ruan Genwang immediately made the decision to withdraw from the rainforest and go to Hanoi City for the sake of his family's development after receiving the secret order from the Prime Minister. In order to achieve this goal in a shorter period of time, he made the decision to allow each army to retreat on their own. From his point of view, since he had already decided not to fight, the mercenaries would not be so stubborn as to not let him go. Because Ruan Genwang's order to retreat was very urgent, many of the troops scattered outside did not have time to retreat. However, he did not consider this. According to the Prime Minister's secret letter, returning to Hanoi as soon as possible was the most important thing. Everything else could be put aside for now. Leading the 10,000 Jiaoji soldiers, they quickly advanced through the rainforest of Mount Liang. This kind of military operation caught the Cold Vanguard Army off guard. When Battalion Commander Wu Sheng, who was leading the team, heard the news from the scout, he was still in a daze. Battalion Commander, it must be because the 6th young Master Sun Bian gave them too much pressure. These people can't take care of us. Yes, Battalion Commander. This is a great opportunity for us. We can use this opportunity to gather our troops and launch a counterattack. The two company commanders of the Cold Vanguard Army expressed their thoughts. Wu Sheng's eyes lit up when he heard these words. That's right. Such a desperate retreat will definitely leave behind many openings. Even though the Cold Vanguard Army had been wearing down the Jiaoji Army's forces, they had been searching for opportunities while defending or fleeing. They wanted to launch a frontal attack, but the difference in numbers was too great. Based on Yang Chendong's idea of paying the greatest price with the smallest price, Wu Sheng had never made up his mind to launch a large-scale counterattack. However, things were different now. Ruan Genwang's sudden retreat must not only have caught them off guard, but also the Jiaoji army that he led. The various armies did not retreat at the same time. This caused some of the Jiaoji soldiers to stand out from the rest. How many troops can we immediately contact? Wu Sheng immediately made up his mind and began to prepare for the attack. Hearing Wu Sheng ask such a question, the two company commanders beside him shuddered and said excitedly, "Battalion Commander, we have a total of 1 battalion and 2 companies, a total of 600 people. If we launch an attack in an emergency, we can gather 500 men." 500 men? In the end, it's still too little. Wu Sheng said with a sigh. This time, Yang Chendong had only given him 3 battalions to lure the enemy. Only one of them was the Cold Vanguard Battalion, while the other 2 were auxiliary battalions. In order to complete the mission better, he had split the 3 battalions into 2 groups, harassing Ruan Genwang's and Chen Heijin's forces. If not for the limited number of soldiers, he would have launched a large-scale counterattack long ago. Even though they were at a disadvantage in terms of military strength, they were well-equipped, well-trained, and well-coordinated. In the end, they managed to eliminate nearly 15,000 enemies in just over 10 days. Dividing up the losses, each soldier managed to kill at least 10 enemies. This was already a very impressive achievement. Yang Chendong's thoughts shifted from the question of the number of troops. When he looked at the two company commanders again, his expression was already very firm. All right, then inform all the soldiers we can contact to start the counterattack. But at the very least, we have to use platoons as a unit. If the number of soldiers is lower than this unit, we can only engage in guerrilla warfare and cannot initiate an attack. A platoon has at least 30 men. With 30 men as a unit, this number is already very low. If the number of soldiers is lower than this number, then it is no longer an attack, but a suicide mission. After all, if the number of soldiers is too small, there is no way to coordinate. Even if they have advanced firearms, if the enemy numbers are too high, they may not even have time to reload. If the battle really escalates to close quarters, then the losses of the Cold Vanguard Battalion would be unavoidable. This would make Wu Sheng have no choice but to answer to Yang Chendong. The orders from the battalion headquarters were quickly relayed through the Cold Vanguard Battalion's unique method of communication. Following that, the Cold Vanguard Battalion soldiers who were originally hidden in various places started to gather. They formed platoons and began their counterattack. With the Cold Vanguard Battalion's actions, the sound of gunfire in the rainforest became more intense. Once they formed a platoon, they would appear in the open in front of the Jiaoji soldiers who were still searching for them and wipe them out. Under the long-range attacks of the Type 95 and Type 81 rifles, the Jiaoji centurions and Kiliarchs who thought they had finally found their targets and were able to contribute greatly to the battle began to flee in all directions. An unorganized army was just a bunch of stragglers who couldn't withstand a single blow. Even though the Cold Vanguard Battalion didn't have many soldiers, they were all elites. Every time they fired a clip of bullets, a few Jiaoji soldiers would be killed. A platoon of Cold Vanguard Battalion soldiers could charge up to 300 to 400 people at a time. The Jiaoji soldiers who were lucky enough to survive were also terrified. They no longer had any intention of exterminating the mercenaries. Once they had the chance, they would flee in all directions. They couldn't form any effective resistance. Wang Gengwang, who was retreating back to Hanoi City, originally planned to gather his troops as he retreated. However, along the way, he only managed to gather less than 5,000 men. When he heard that at least 5,000 soldiers were killed by the mercenaries or escaped to God knows where, he clenched his teeth in anger. "General, should we go back now and fight the mercenaries until both sides suffer, or should we continue to retreat?" Seeing that the death toll was increasing, the Kiliarchs didn't dare to make a decision on their own. They could only pass the problem to Wang Gengwang. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.